Okay, guys. All right, guys. I have no idea if this is working right now. I'm gonna have to check and see if this is even working. Oh, I think it is working. Okay. Thank God. So, I want to welcome you guys to another episode of Doc's Inferno, where I cover some of the contemporary goings ons in the parapolitical sphere and even in the occulto sphere interest. Today's Inferno. I'm going to be talking, of course, about the MK Ultra congressional meeting that happened. Let's just say since since this was disclosed in the 1970s. Um, this unfortunately, this stream has been a very difficult stream. This is into what's going on with the congressional hearing, and I apologize, of course, guys, for the I apologize, guys, for a lot of the technical problems I've been having. Um, I've been having a lot of technical problems because I think OBS just updated, and I haven't streamed in a while. I've been kind of rusty, but nevertheless, let me just get into some of the stuff I'm going to talk about tonight um, with MK Ultra and the congressional hearings. So, first off, I want to say that there are some concerns with bringing this whenever mainstream Congress gets into something. It's a little concerning because in many ways it's a limited hangout to obscure some of the other things that are going on presently. That the economy is very bad. The war in Iran is quite pervasive and looming in the air. Um, there's also some other concerns with Israel and Palestine and with the increasing radicalization of people online and the sort of political shift in America is somewhat concerning in itself. So you could maybe argue this might be somewhat of a limited hangout, but I still think it's nevertheless very fascinating to explore. This stream is going to be not really something I'm going to, do a deep dive on MK Ultra per se, because that is a very expansive topic, and some of what's discussed is sort of in the limited stroke of or scope of what I can really discuss here. But one thing I think is important is we need to examine some of the people that were brought to the congressional hearings for to testify. You had three people. Two of them I'm familiar with, Stephen Kinzer and, of course, Tim O'Neill. The other is a woman that I think was a part of the national, the NIH. I think it's National Health Organization. And the other two, like Stephen Kinzer, is a scholar that has written extensively about a certain guy by the name of Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb is an interesting case. Guy that was the head chemist, the head guy in charge of a lot of the MK Ultra operations. In addition to that, according what came out, at least what they said in the congressional hearings, that Sidney Gottlieb had almost full autonomy to do whatever he wanted in terms of the operations. He had almost like complete like autonomy for like most of the proceedings, like the operation. The CIA had limited interaction with a lot of the medical facilities. One of the medical facilities was specially selected by Alan Dulles. That's about the only oversight that a lot of the CIA had with these facilities. And in addition to that, pretty much they had free reign to do whatever they wanted. And Sandy Gottlieb didn't really at the time fit the mold of somebody that was attached to, you know, intelligence, like someone like Dulles or Angleton. So why did MK Ultra come into existence to begin with? Well, primarily it was a means to try to understand if China and Russia were developing mind control. National Institute of Health. Yeah, I stand corrected. Um, so it was like something that was like they were trying to understand what was going on with mind control at the time, which China and Russia were doing such experiments at the time, but the CIA was like far off base when it came to like some of the human rights abuses that were going on a regular basis in like MK Ultra. So I'm going to play now the congressional hearings, and I'm going to do like some commentary on it, guys. Um, so, like I said, I'm sorry about the boomer tech early on. Sorry about the freaking boomer tech I was going through, recently with the OBS. I have to get that shit situated and see what's going on. If it's any consolation, I also got my computer hacked very recently by some people that I think might be connected to 764 or some type of weird satanic organization. Believe it or not, I'm not kidding about this either. It really is like some kind of weird satanic organization that's connected to Joshua Sutter. I kid you not, guys. I kid you not. Freaking Joshua Sutter and his like merry band of like Satanists. I actually probably did hack my account recently. I had to fight it back from them, of course. They didn't manage to gain my account, and I locked them out of the account too, because I am just that paranoid and have extra layers of security for that account. But anyway, let me get into the congressional hearing. Okay. I don't know if you guys can hear that congressional hearing. Just great. Yeah, I think I have to like check my settings. But yeah, let's get back to like MK Ultra, what I was talking about. Maybe it'll play, maybe it'll queue up, maybe not. But one of the guys that they interviewed is named Tim O'Neill. Tim O'Neill is someone who is like in charge of investigating, the whole Operation Chaos. So Operation Chaos is something that came about because Angleton wanted to monitor domestically some of the countercultural happenings of the late 60s into the early 70s. And primarily, the problem with that is that the CIA cannot legally monitor people or surveil people in domestic settings. This is something that is against the Constitution. This is something that is against the policies of America. So Angleton found a weak workaround when it came to monitoring like citizens looking into starting something like Operation Chaos. And thus, that's the name of Tim O'Neill's book. Primarily, a lot of Operation Chaos takes place, and I haven't read Operation. I have a confession. I haven't read Operation Chaos in its entirety. Eventually, one of these days, I'll probably do a breakdown of Operation Chaos and look further into like what Tim O'Neill's assertions are, because I know a lot of people have contentions with what Tim O'Neill says in his book Operation Chaos. A lot of people think he's not a reliable narrator. And I think a lot of the people that are really fanatical about the whole process church stuff, yes, there we go, the process church is mentioned. A lot of those people note that he downplays a lot of the process church connection to Charles Manson, to other people like Jolly and West, to other sort of happenings that occurred like in the 1960s. I'm at the process church stuff. I know people are very fervent about it. I remain skeptical about a lot of the claims about the process church, but I will respectfully disagree with a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my friends that are in the parapolitical community. Um, you can if you get evidence out there, then I'm willing to listen to it, but I'm a little hesitant to just accept it. Just as I'm sort of hesitant to accept some of Tim O'Neill's, because honestly, I kind of think Tim O'Neill is not so much per se a limited hangout like this congressional hearing probably is. But I think he's more or less a guy that's just found a way to hustle. He's found a way to like hustle conspiracy culture. And so I like conspiracy culture. I like the conspiracy community. I don't like all of it, okay, because some of it sucks. Some of it is just straight batshit. And some of it is just downright retarded. But there are like some aspects of it that I really love. Like, I think it's like kind of cool that we can create this sort of alternate history. I think there's something wrong with my it's not playing the Congressional Congress. I think it's kind of cool, however, that we can sort of play this alternate timeline and some of this alternate sort of history to try to examine. So in many ways, it's kind of just the poor man's folk art, the poor man's like folk lore, to the point to where like we can kind of question a lot of the consensus that is being brought before us. But of course, that sort of has like bias in itself and can be weaponized by the elites if there's not clear discernment. And of course, there has to be like some logic inserted into some conspiracy culture, but it's very much always been a part of the American landscape. The American landscape has always had crackpots, tinfoil hat people, crazy people that were asserting things about, the elites. The same thing goes with like probably medieval like Europe as well. There were people like that were asserting things about Guez del Reyes as well. But there is a certain danger in that the aristocracy can kind of use this to undermine a lot of us when it comes to discounting us. So that's why I try to, for all the salacious and sensationalist claims that are made about all of these affairs, I try to assert just as many facts that can be verified and validated until we actually have sort of the FOIA or we have the proof. But it's good to play speculation. I mean, that's kind of what makes a good detective is someone that has an active imagination, but not an overactive imagination to where it buries and stifles their progress. You know, that's when it becomes kind of a problem. So I just and just to like go back to like the hacking. So I gotta like really get my router sort of checked because I think they fucked with my router. To be quite honest with you, and I'm not kidding about this. They really did fuck with my router. They really are like really fucking with my like connection, really severely and badly. So that's why I'm coming in and out, and some of the latency is really bad. And plus, I live in a rural area, so the connection isn't always great in itself. Yeah, I was going to mention actually Dr. Cameron Ewing as well. Let's see, so daring about if I had listened to Iceman. No, I'm not familiar with that person named Iceman. I'm not familiar with that person. Um, Maybe you can tell me more about him. Well, let's see. Where was I with the congressional hearings? Hopefully, it comes up now.
Let
Okay,
constitutional
here we go, guys. Enough of my yammering. Let's get on to the congressional hearings.
elector shock decades one.
All right. Also, there's a very special guest appearance on these hearings, believe it or not. It's the new Drizzy album. Oh, you're talking about Drake.
This hearing from the Task Force on Declassification of Federal Secrets will come to order. Welcome, everyone. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. This hearing is about the crimes committed by the Central Intelligence Agency against the American citizens and the decades of secrecy used to conceal them. The American people deserve a complete and truthful record. The victims and their families deserve acknowledgement, and this Congress has a constitutional obligation to ensure that full declassification is not delayed any longer. Project MKUltra was not a policy failure or an overzealous program that got out of hand. It was a deliberate, systematic governmental operation that subjected American citizens, prisoners, hospital patients, veterans, ordinary people to LSD, electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, psychological torture without their knowledge or consent. This went on for 20 years on American soil, funded by American taxpayer dollars and authorized by the very top of U.S. intelligence apparatus. And this program, when it did end, the men who ran it did not cooperate with investigators. They did not come forward. They committed another crime. They destroyed evidence. The documents this task force has reviewed are unambiguous. In January 1973, the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, prepared to leave office. He personally ordered the destruction of MKUltra records. The CIA official document in writing states, over my stated objectives, the MKUltra files were destroyed by the order of DCI Mr. Helms shortly before his departure from office. A separate internal account confirms that Helms telephoned Dr. Gottlieb directly and instructed him to destroy, quote, all files pertaining to drug research and associated activities. Gottlieb compiled 4 people, spent an entire day tearing, burning down 152 files. Then Gottlieb had his personal papers destroyed by his secretary before he retired. The head of the CIA-owned records center protested the destruction in writing, but he was overruled. That is obstruction of justice. That is criminal destruction of federal records, and neither individuals were ever charged with a crime for it. Helms received a $2,000 fine for lying to Congress about an unrelated matter and collected his government pension until he died. Gottlieb retired in rural Virginia and wrote poetry. No one went to prison.
Well, note that Sidney Gottlieb, aka the head chemist in charge, he was never punished. Neither was anybody who ever perpetuated MK Ultra. Never punished. Never called out. Never stood on trial. Not one time. And that's where I go back to what I was talking about with Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb is someone I'm going to definitely further do a deep dive into, because Sidney Gottlieb, you have to understand, was not just an ordinary chemist. He was a guy that was well versed in pharmacopoeia and basically pharmacokinetics, pharmakeia, which was he was basically a black magician. You can look at Sidney Gottlieb as being like a black magician that was um, pretty much setting the stages for MK Ultra. And he's very much tied into other people like G.A. Estabrooks in Canada, and also William Sargent of the UK. And if you haven't like read G.A. Estabrooks when it comes to his books about mind control, there's a very interesting chapter in his book where he goes into like what it takes to be a spy, how to break your own mind, and sort of like submerge yourself into delusions to the point to where you could convince yourself you are somebody else. And they utilize this technique and tactic probably on a lot of CIA officers on itself, because remember, one of the vital things, if you are, a lot of this MK Ultra stuff is to sort of delude yourself and to sort of like take on a new fantasy and a reality. And this is why I say it's very important to study MK Ultra, because I speculate and I theorize that a lot of the stuff that's going on the internet, that we're going through the psyops of the internet, starts with 764 and some of the other sort of alternate reality games, is something that I believe might be a continuation of the MK Ultra experimentation. Remember, just like Gladio, I don't believe MK Ultra ever stopped per se, and that is brought up in the congressional hearings. But I wanted to briefly sort of explain like who Sidney Gottlieb is and why he's sort of important to this whole equation. I'll be talking about Sidney Gottlieb probably in other episodes. But let's get further into the hearings.
No victim was ever formally compensated by the government for the harm that they caused. By 1975, the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission had already established through sworn testimony and the survivors.
Okay, I want to briefly also talk about the Church Committee real quick and like give some insight into like what people may not be understanding about the Church Committee. The Church Committee was a hearing that was held, I believe, sometime in the 60s. May have been the 70s. Sorry if my timeline is a little off. Um, but the Church Committee didn't just talk about MK Ultra. It also talked about people that were quote unquote were the enemies of America. That's where they brought Gary Rowe, the Klansman, up there with a pillowcase on his head. Ironically, with the pillowcase on his head, um, where he was like confirmed to be a snitch that committed illegal acts under the guise of the FBI. Um, but you also had other people up there, such as Angleton and others and Dulles, that were testifying about like MK Ultra. So you had this like big church committee that was supposed to resolve this whole thing with MK Ultra, but of course, all these people like sort of just by that time, no doubt, had been winding down the operations, um, or they were at their height to where they could hide. And also, I want you to note about the National Institute of Health. This lady, she talks about how she wants to like have all these like vaccine trials in places like the Congo and other parts of the global south. Well, in spycraft, one of the things that that are covers is called a cutout. So a lot of these things in the global south are sort of like cutouts that are distractors from things that are happening domestically. So they will do an operation somewhere in like the global south, and they will do um, a real domestic operation in America, and they'll use that cutout to get funding from the U.S. government. And while that money is funneling into places like Haight Ashbury and into various different like operation clinics, so the American, government never gives special interest groups, activists, whether they be far left, far right, white nationalists, you name it. They don't ever give these people any kind of money unless they have ulterior motives and they already have psychological operations already running. And by the way, it's not beyond the realms that the CIA infiltrates like local law enforcement, especially in metropolitan areas. For one, the Joint Task Force, starting in like the late 70s to early 80s, they were infiltrating a lot of people in the Joint Task Force in places like LA. This is where like things like ramparts became more commonplace in the Patty Hearst affair, which, if you know anything about Jolly and West, good old Jolly and West, he was involved with the Patty Hearst affair. He was involved with Manson. He was involved with Timothy McVeigh. He was involved with probably good old Uncle Ted as well. So all these people were, at the service of good old Jolly and West. And that's the linchpin with all this. How much you want to bet good old Jolly and West and also Sidney Gottlieb are probably, they're probably like homeboys as well, if I had to like guess. But back to the congressional hearing.
1963 Inspector General report that MKUltra existed and that the CIA had run a program of human experimentation on unwitting Americans. The scope and detail of what we know today is largely because of an accident. In 1977, an archivist diligently complying with a FOIA request discovered 7 boxes of MKUltra financial records that had been misfiled and escaped the bonfire. Those 7 boxes included the names of institutions, the name of subprojects, the researchers who participated, the specific operation that the CIA had funded, and without them, the vast majority of MKUltra would only be a rumor, just as Helms and Gottlieb intended. Those 7 boxes revealed that MKUltra comprised at least 149 subprojects, operated across more than 80 institutions, and involved 185 non-government researchers. They revealed that the CIA covertly contributed $375,000 to a hospital research wing, which was approved directly by DCI Alan Dulles, which Richard Helms.
Listen to that. They contributed $500 million, if I heard that correct, to a research wing commensurated by none other than Mr. Alan Dulles. Now, Alan Dulles is someone that also I will do a further deeper dive into because he's very vital to the early formations of the OSS, also to the current situation in the Ukraine. Well, good old Alan Dulles, right around the end of World War II, basically met with a guy named Richard Galen. Richard Galen, our Nazi friends, already had these various different spy networks worked out. And what's interesting about Richard Galen is Richard Galen was kind of a double agent. Richard Galen was working for the Nazis, and he was working potentially with Canaris for the Soviet Union as well. So it's kind of interesting. Galen, like most spies, had like kind of two faces. Never can really trust a spy, can you? That's why Alan Dulles, the world premier Scots-Irish pioneer when it came to the CIA, decided to enlist good old Galen in making these various different like spy networks. Called it the Galen Network. And then, he ends up in, MK Ultra. Now, what were the precursors to MK Ultra? Of course, you had Project Artichoke. That's right, Project Artichoke. You also have MK Often as well, which was The operation that the military utilized and the CIA and military intelligence sort of collaborated together to make the study of biological warfare. Now that ties into the good old C word, the COVID, that a lot of you guys are concerned about. I personally don't care about the COVID or the CVID. I'm really not a person that's too concerned about that stuff because it's been greatly exaggerated, and like most things, it's sort of exaggerated to the standpoint to where I don't know what to believe about it. And a lot of people expertise to talk about it. So, like, who's telling the truth? I don't know, but it's definitely good to be critical if they are trying to like implement using bioengineering and bio medical research to engineer people. That's definitely something that is something you should probably be concerned about that ties into MK Ultra. So let's continue.
Concurrence, so the agency could use unwitting patients as experimental subjects in what their own documents called a hospital safe house. The CIA's Inspector General said in 1963 his classified report concluded that the program had exceeded the agency's legal chapter, and covert testing on unwitting subjects placed the rights and interests of U.S. citizens in jeopardy. The program ran for a decade that we know of, and they ignored their own watchdog. Let me be clear what I believe that we are dealing with here. Administering drugs to people without their knowledge or consent, subjecting humans to psychological torture, and using prisoners and hospital patients as non-consenting research subjects. These are crimes against humanity. The Central Intelligence Agency committed them, and then the director of the CIA was ordering the destruction of evidence. Today we will hear from two witnesses who have spent years unraveling the cover-up that our government ordered. Stephen Kinzer documented the life and crimes of Sidney Gottlieb in his book, Prisoner of Chief, and Tom O'Neill spent over 20 years investigating what the CIA buried and what they obscured that, in my mind, constitute some of the worst notorious crimes against humanity in the 20th century. Their persistence in the research in this hearing is possible simply because they are patriots. The American people deserve the complete record. The victims and their families deserve acknowledgement, accountability, and justice. And this Congress has a constitutional obligation to make sure that the CIA never does this again. With that, I'm going to be opening up first questions, and I'll hold my questions to the end to Representative Burleson. But before I do pass it, I did want to just note, a few weeks ago, we did receive reports. There's some back and forth regarding the CIA and ODNI pertaining to new MKUltra boxes that were discovered. Myself and Representative Burleson did go down to Langley. We did meet with the CIA, and the CIA is currently in the process of declassifying newly found documentation, although the documents, and I feel comfortable enough to share it here, pertain specifically to a forgery program that was being housed under MKUltra. So as soon as those files are released, we will be putting out notification with your help to also comb through some of the newly released documents, but I did want to give you a quick update. Without further ado, I would like to now recognize Representative Eric Burleson for his questions. Go ahead. Without objection, Representative Perry and Representative Higgins from Pennsylvania and Louisiana is waived on to the committee for the purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's subcommittee hearing. I need the opening statement. Yeah. And I'd like to now recognize Dr. Kinzer and the witnesses for the opening statements. I have to swear them in. Stephen Kinzer is a historian, journalist, and author of Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb, and the CIA's Search for Mind Control. Tom O'Neill is an investigative journalist who authored Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. And Elizabeth Genexi, did I say that right, ma'am? Genexi is an independent consultant and former senior program.
You should hear, like, basically Elizabeth Genexi saying that the American public really has trust in the National Institute of Health. While she also says that Dr. Fauci didn't lie, She also says that, in addition to that, they told the truth about the connections between the NIH and also to the Wuhan labs. Kind of interesting about good old Calaxi, whatever her name is. She gets no applause, she gets no love during the whole committee. People just snub her and just don't make her feel at home, and you can kind of tell that she's totally tone deaf when it comes to a lot of the analysis of the general public when it comes to looking into the National Institute of Health and their kind of trust in the American public. Caraxi, you know, Caraxi, whatever her name is, doesn't get much love. But anyway, let me continue.
Program Officer at the National Institute of Health. We look forward to hearing what you have to say today on this important subject. Pursuant to Committee Rules 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may now take your seat. We appreciate you being here today. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your opening statements, and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. However, if it does go over, we will not be gaveling you out. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is illuminated and members can hear. In front of you, again, will turn green after 4 minutes. The light will turn yellow, and when the red light comes on, that means that your 5 minutes has expired, and we will ask you to please wrap it up. I would now like to recognize Stephen Kinzer for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to this task force for confronting the enormous issue of overclassification of government documents and the culture of secrecy that enables it. I'm especially gratified by your interest in MK Ultra, the project the CIA carried out through the 1950s in an attempt to find the secret of mind control. MK Ultra was one of the most secret government programs in American history. The chemist who directed.
By the way, shouts out to Dystopian Deep Dive, just to highlight kind of what you said about Nightmare blunt rotation. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. I mean, who would want to get into a blunt rotation with someone from the NIH? You know, I and you wouldn't want to also get Sidney Gottlieb, in that mix as well. I mean, imagine just passing the blunt to any of these people, on the congressional floor and talking about MK Ultra. Tim O'Neill probably is kind of a weirdo, to be quite honest with you. So that's kind of an interesting comment. But anyway, let me get back to the whole ordeal, the whole congressional hearing. Let's get back to it.
Sidney Gottlieb lived in total anonymity. My book, Poisoner in Chief, may be the most complete account of MK Ultra that exists in public, but I'm painfully aware that I have discovered only a small portion of what MK Ultra was and what Sidney Gottlieb did. In 1951, the CIA hired Gottlieb and directed him to launch what became MK Ultra. Gottlieb believed that in order to find a way to implant a new mind into someone's brain, you first had to find a way to destroy the mind that was in there already. In its search for ways to destroy a human mind and body, conducted the most extreme experiments on human beings that have ever been carried out by a U.S. government agency. By any standard, they qualify as medical torture. These experiments took place in prisons, clinics, and safe houses in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, and even in Latin America. Officers of MK Ultra were authorized to travel to foreign countries, preferably those under formal or informal U.S. occupation, and ask the local CIA station to provide them with expendables, human beings who would not be missed if they disappeared.
Expendables.
Gottlieb had what amounted to a license to kill issued by the US government. Neither the number of MKUltra victims.
Okay. So this is where previously I was talking about sort of the CIA cutouts becomes increasingly relevant to the whole like discourse and the whole operation. And this is also like ties into what I was talking about also previously when I was talking about Afro-Caribbean and trans types religions being integrated in with MK Ultra, because part of the primitive way to understand sort of the mechanism of hijacking someone is through possession, i.e., through what they call in Haiti riding the horseman, which is where a spirit possesses a person and hijacks their internal spiritual framework, or like in terms of like psychic driving, which was by Ewan, I believe the Ewan guy, Ewan Cameron in Canada. So increasingly, it becomes very relevant how Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA were also utilizing anthropology, and we're also finding means to like hijack a lot of these local governments in the global south, and we're finding ways to sort of capture these various different means, nodes of intelligence, and at the same time devising methods and practices through MK Ultra to try to to destabilize and to dissociate people's minds. And using the model, of course, as trance and also as anthropology as sort of a a respectable sort of like academic cutout when it comes to demonstrating a lot of these techniques and practices. And that's why I have recently really been studying stuff like possession and the occult to understand sort of its ties and connections to psychedelics and drugs, which, believe it or not, there is quite a connection there. And it's something that definitely needs to be explored more. But as far as like Stephen Kinzer, I have not read his book in its entirety, but I think he's an interesting choice when it comes to Sidney Gottlieb. And again, like I said mentioned previously, I'm going to get into Sidney Gottlieb's life in another stream after I do some like thorough research on this guy, because nevertheless, Sidney Gottlieb was much like a black magician. He was someone that was well versed in chemistry and also with poisons. That's what really caught my attention when they were talking about Sidney Gottlieb being aware of like poisons. It's like, well, it's like kind of interesting how they go into like these various different places like Haiti and the Congo and places like this where the natives were very well versed in, concocting these sort of types of poisons. And then all of a sudden, the CIA sort of co ops a lot of this knowledge and utilizes it in their own little experimentation. And if you doubt what I'm saying about all this, I encourage you to do a FOIA request on intelligence communities, connections to Central African. They have a whole department in like the 1970s. They were financing and universities study of Central African religions. I didn't believe it myself until I did the FOIA and looked into it. So they are very much interested in sort of trance religions, possession, not just limited to African type of religions, but also to other cultural practices that involves possession as well. But they're very much interested in that, and I do have to emphasize that is the case, and I would recommend for you guys to look into that as well if you can. If you have the ability to get yourself a FOIA or you live near a university library, look into that shit because that is very much part of MK Ultra as well. Because William Sargent, the guy who wrote Battle for the Mind that William Luther Pierce used for the Turner Diaries and used for a lot of his techniques. Same thing goes with G.A. Estabrooks. G.A. Estabrooks in Canada worked with Ewan Cameron also as well. he worked with them as well and wrote a whole fucking book about hypnotism. Wrote a whole entire book, wrote a whole entire chapter on how one could break themselves psychologically, not to have a personality, and also to avoid to literally bring about dissociative states. Kind of interesting that a lot of this stuff comes about. It's not a lot of it's a lot of people think of this as like speculation. No, it's not speculation. A lot of it's been proven. A lot of it's coming out there on the congressional floor. But let me get back into the congressional meeting.
Victims nor the number of those who were experimented to death is known. Gottlieb, as a result of this license to kill, might have been the most powerful unknown American of the 20th century. Some information about MKUltra spilled out during the 1970s, but senior CIA officers had intentionally let Gottlieb operate without supervision, so they were able to claim that they knew nothing about his excesses. This was a way for the...
So let me emphasize also, did you hear that? Gottlieb got to operate without any overhead or supervision from the CIA. This means he could do as many unethical things as proposed. And personally, probably wouldn't have come out if so many famous people had not been MK Ultra'd. Let's go over a line of people that were MK Ultra'd. Infamous and famous people. You got William S. Burroughs at the Kentucky Lexington narco farm. You got William S. Burroughs' son, who wrote about it in Kentucky Ham. Also, William S. Burroughs wrote about it in the book Junkie. You got those two people. Those two people were involved in some very interesting activities, including Burroughs initially was into Scientology and later times developed this interesting Discordian sort of magical technique called the cut-up technique. And, you got that little cultural, kind of countercultural connection. You got Whitey Bulger. During the time Whitey Bulger, in many cases, Whitey Bulger, the infamous Irish mafia snitch, was also subjected to MK Ultra experimentation. You got good old Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted was I think there was a guy named Harry. I'm trying to think of his name. Harry Murray or something like that. That subjected good old Uncle Ted to experimentation in Harvard University. This kid genius goes to Harvard University, volunteers, and is kind of a fish out of water. And he volunteers for this MK Ultra experimentation for about a week, I believe, or maybe a month. I can mention more, maybe. I mean, some people believe Charles Manson was. I haven't really seen evidence Charles Manson is necessarily MK Ultra experiment, but I'm open to the possibility. Tim O'Neill makes somewhat of a compelling case, but not quite so. Some peculiarities with Manson as well. His connection to Haight Ashbury, and also sort of his, some of the reason why when he got released from jail and prison, I think they cite in this congressional hearing that it was kind of odd for him to have this sort of harem of women at his service, and Manson was kind of a pimp. I'm not a bit surprised with that. Manson appears to have, even his mother said, that he had this sort of way with women, and he'd learned a lot of probably pimping techniques from people in juvenile detention and also into his various different jail stints. This put him in a lot of close proximity to the underworld. So, I mean, being able to coerce women into joining his cult isn't as convincing per se that he was some kind of subject. What's even more convincing, however, is the Manson's family access to orange sunshine. Orange sunshine was a special type of LSD that was very high grade LSD. We're talking about medical grade LSD at a time when it was very hard to get for a lot of people. And also the fact that Manson had so many like connections to like top people in the Beach Boys and in the Laurel Canyon scene. I mean, that could be argued as like evidence as well that Dave McGowan does in like his book. Not to overplay that a little bit because I like Dave McGowan, but like he's not perfect. The same thing goes with a lot of like parapolitical researchers. I like a lot of their work, but they're not perfect. I'm not perfect in my analysis, but I have to be very careful and go over this shit with like a fine-tooth comb to where I don't sound too much of a crackpot than I already am. So, so I have to be very careful about that. Just making this sort of loose connections. I personally don't like to do it. A lot of other podcasters and people like to do that. I personally don't like to do that. I like to keep, even though it's not as popular, it's not as like popular in these like everyone wants to make all these different like spurious connections. But I think Manson, there are some peculiarities with Manson. His, like Jolly and West probably knew who he was before he ever was talked to. I mean, if like he interacted in Haight Ashbury, he interacted with a lot of people like Jolly and West. And I think a lot of people don't know about Manson is that the Haight Ashbury project was something that was started by the precursors to the hippies, the diggers. The diggers were sort of this already prior to the 1960s, this group that Manson interacted with. And the diggers were very instrumental in some of the people that were in the diggers were very instrumental in starting the Haight Ashbury project. And then Jolly and West sort of usurped it. There's a very interesting guy that left his history. If you're into history on the left, look into this guy named Emmett Grogan. Very interesting guy that was involved with the Haight Ashbury before Jolly and West took it over. That's again, his name is Emmett Grogan. He was interested in the Haight Ashbury project where they were starting a free clinic for, I believe, the hippies at the time. But anyway, insight into like Charles Manson. Also, Charles Manson was allowed to go anywhere, and he was on probation. So Charles Manson had all these like regulations on him, and he had like this probation officer that just allowed him to go where and thaw and with and about everywhere and everywhere, and he always pauses, you know. So that's like some peculiarities about Charles Manson. That's very interesting. It's not that he was able to amass like a large female following, you know. There's like a lot more interesting things about Charles Manson than that. That's where I kind of disagree with Tim O'Neill. It wouldn't have been very hard, even for an illiterate pimp like Charles Manson, to amass like a large, like sort of harem of women in like the 1960s and 70s. Come on. Anyway, I'm gonna like play this.
CIA to deny its institutional role in MK Ultra and to portray it misleadingly as the product of one man's sadism or excessive zeal. Investigating MK Ultra is challenging because when Gottlieb and his mentor Richard Helms left the CIA in 1973, they illegally ordered that its records be destroyed. Soon afterwards, under DCI Stansfield Turner, a CIA analyst, as you pointed out, Madam Chairman, discovered a cache of MK Ultra documents hidden among financial records. Turner credited that analyst with doing a very diligent job of Sherlock Holmesing. That same diligence, I believe, could bring results today. One of the great mysteries of MK Ultra has to do with the death in 1953 of an MK Ultra scientist, Frank Olson, who had announced his intention to quit the project.
Good old Frank Olson. Yes. I'm glad it made it to this point. Frank Olson is something also that I don't know if anybody here has ever seen the series Wormwood. Wormwood is based off the death of Frank Olson. to where supposedly, I believe in 1956, some people said it was suicide. Um, if you look at that movie, The Good Shepherd, there's a scene in there where like Matt Damon's character, which is supposed to be James Zangleton, goes and they throw that LSD on that guy and he jumps out of the White House window. That supposedly is based on Frank Olson. Frank Olson, the whole Wormwood movie is told of, I believe, Frank Olson's brother, which is trying to look into the cause of, his death, which a lot of people don't believe it's like suicide. It's funny how, like, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when they had to execute somebody and when they were like, too deep in, like, when it came to like political espionage and intrigue, they always threw them out the window. So, kind of interesting. Frank Olson is mentioned, and if you guys haven't already, look into Frank Olson and the miniseries on Netflix called Wormwood, because it does give you some insight into like sort of the destructfulness of MK Ultra and how it was sent out there to destroy people and to really cause some harm, at least to like Frank Olson, is one casualty of the MK Ultra that we know of. So anyway, go ahead. I'm gonna gonna play the congressional meeting again. Let's go.
Plunged from a New York hotel room was described in the press as the suicide of an Army scientist. He was not an Army scientist. He worked for the CIA, and evidence suggests that his death may not have been a suicide. So there could be hidden documents that could illuminate this case. That in addition to searching for unknown documents, this committee could do a tremendous service by simply asking for the end of redactions on the documents that we now have. There are reams of documents about MKUltra that have heavy sections redacted. In the 1970s, this was justified by the argument that it had only been 20 years since these terrible things had happened and revealing details might affect national security. Now 70 years have passed. That argument can no longer be valid. So I would urge this committee to try to fill out all the blank spaces in the documents that we have, because we know that is there.
Now, okay, it's almost near July 4th, and I gotta be honest with you. My faith in patriotism in America is kind of down. It's on a downward trajectory. Don't get me wrong. America still has its perks. It still has its, things to be proud of, I suppose. But increasingly, I have grown distasteful towards the mainstream government. And that's not just Trump, by the way. That's also the CIA and the FBI and the alphabet agencies. And I know this is going to piss some people off. Just a little warning in advance. So why the hell did they keep this from us like 70 years? They kept this from the American public 70 fucking years. Can you imagine that? 70 fucking years keeping something like this from us. And they expect us to still trust the intelligence agencies? They want us still to trust the FBI, the CIA, and the military intelligence agencies? And they want us to go and die in the sandbox for Israel? Yeah! Sign me up!
The task force could also consider trying to determine whether some new incarnation of MKUltra exists today. When the main phase of MKUltra drew to a close in the early 1960s, Sidney Gottlieb concluded that it had failed. There is no such thing as mind control. Even if he was right, however, he may have been right only at that time. In the many decades since then, there have been enormous advances in cyber technology, in artificial intelligence, in neuroscience. Covert agencies may have access now to tools for mind control that Sidney Gottlieb could not even have imagined. It may well have been true in 1963.
Oh shit! After that Israel rant, I lost like 2 people watching. Holy shit! No, I'm just joking. Free Palestine, though. Free Palestine.
Agree that mind control is a myth, but whether it's still true is uncertain. And that question of whether mind control might now be possible under our new circumstances is something that has presumably occurred to scientists who work for secret services, including our own. This task force has a chance to connect the past to the future. A renewed effort to find MK Ultra documents from the 1950s and to fill out the redactions of those that have been released might shed new light on how the CIA operated during that period. It could also inform a new inquiry into whether any mind control projects are now underway inside the US security apparatus. That might help prevent the emergence of a 21st century MK Ultra that could be even more destructive than the original. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kinzer. I now recognize Tom O'Neill for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Luna, and members of the committee. Oh, sorry. Should I start over?
Boomer tech. Boomer tech.
Thank you, Chairwoman Luna, and members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here today. Almost 50 years ago, the last congressional hearings into MK Ultra took place just a short walk from here in the Dirksen Senate office. Convened in August and September of 1977, representatives of the CIA told Congress and the American people that its 25-year effort to control human behavior had been a colossal failure. Because I believe Congress was never told the truth about what this program actually achieved. In fact, I believe the agency misled Congress in 1977 when it characterized MK Ultra as a failure. In 1999, I accepted a magazine assignment to write a story about murders committed by a group of hippies called the Manson family. For those unfamiliar with this horrific episode of American history, in the summer of 1969, 4 young people acting on the orders of a cult leader named Charles Manson went to the home of movie director Roman Polanski and murdered everyone they found there, including his 8.5-month pregnant wife, the actress Sharon Tate. The victims were complete strangers to their killers. The following night, Manson's followers murdered.
All right. Well, I gotta I gotta push back on what Tim O'Neill is saying about the Manson family being complete strangers to Sakelo Drive. This is not 100% correct. The Polish drug dealer that was cozy with the Manson family would have known who Roman Polanski was. They would have been familiar. Manson and his women, especially I believe Susan Atkins, used to strip at Anton LaVey's club. So, I don't know how accurate it is to say that the people at Sakelo Drive would have been to basically the Polanskis. And certainly, if the Polanskis were hanging out with the Polish drug dealer, who I'll be honest, I can't pronounce his name. If we are to be honest about this, Tim O'Neill and some of the other people that sort of uh, still believe the stupid Vincent Bugliosi helter skelter nonsense, would know that there was definitely some interaction with Polanski and probably with at least some people in the fucking in the fucking Manson family. I mean, for Christ's sakes, it's alleged that Atkins, I believe, and Tex Watson had basically they were running off on the plug. That's the whole thing. They claim that they were running off on the plug, and part of the murder plot, if it was not connected to Polanski itself, was kind of a drug deal gone bad. So that's some of my problems with Tim O'Neill. Tim O'Neill is a decent researcher. I'm not going to shit on chaos like everybody does in the parapolitical community. I'm only going to say that there are some indiscrepancies to where, he made some like major mistakes about the Manson family and didn't understand sort of their connections and doesn't emphasize, I think, heavily enough the whole Orange Sunshine connection when it comes to MK Ultra. And I believe also like I'm trying to think of the guy that Manson knew that like was supposedly an LSD chemist. Um, Perhaps like the Brotherhood of the Eternal Love should be mentioned as well. The hippie mafia. Um, Maybe they supplies Manson, but I mean to say that Manson was kind of he was a marginal figure, but to say that they didn't know who the Manson family was before, I'm skeptical of that claim. That's gotta be that's gotta be bullshit.
Another couple in the same grisly fashion. At the time I accepted the assignment, I'd never heard of MKUltra, and I wouldn't for another 2 years after I'd missed countless deadlines, lost the assignment, and fallen down a nightmarish rabbit hole trying to answer the question I couldn't quite shake. How had Manson, a barely literate ex-con, acquired the ability to persuade ordinary young people to murder complete strangers simply because he had told them to? The pursuit of the answer to that question led me to Dr. Louis Jolyon West, known to his friends as Jolly. West was one of the most influential psychiatrists in America. During his career, he crossed paths with some of the most controversial events of the 20th century, including the Patty Hearst.
Oh, you're saying is that Elizabeth Loftus behind him? Behind him? Actually, I don't know what Elizabeth Loftus looks like. I've read Robert Loftus and Elizabeth Loftus books on their experimentation, but I don't know exactly if that is like Elizabeth Loftus wouldn't be if she's still alive. I didn't even know, she was still alive, to be quite honest with you. Let's see though. Uh, Eventually he mentions Jolly and West, okay, which is like everybody's favorite subject in the parapolitical community. They love Jolly and West. They love talking about Jolly and West because he had all these connections to Patty Hearst, all these connections to Tim McVeigh. He also analyzed, Charles Manson. He also looked into like all these various different people. And I think Jolly and West is another interesting figure. And he's probably another guy you mentioned is probably a psychopath. I think Jolly and West is probably some guy that is probably a psychopath. Definitely a good manipulator. I will say that he's someone that was able to like about his presentation and his techniques, and he was able to like evade all kinds of detection by people. So Jolly and West is mentioned by Tim O'Neill. I think Tim O'Neill might actually be he might be high during this whole thing, like you mentioned, dystopian deep dive. It's very possible the dude is high. I wouldn't put it past him, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, I mean, Jolly and West is mentioned everyone's favorite villain in the parapolitical community. Let's continue.
Kidnapping case and the aftermath of the John F. Kennedy assassination investigation. In 1977, West was one of 7 academic researchers named in a front-page New York Times story alleging that the CIA had used American universities, hospitals, and prisons as secret laboratories for experiments involving LSD and other drugs on unwitting human subjects. West vigorously denied the allegations. He acknowledged that the agency had approached him, but insisted he had refused because he said LSD was too dangerous and unpredictable to be used on humans. He added that he limited all of his research with LSD to animals. The revelations in the Times led directly to the congressional hearings held later that year, were effective. He was never investigated, and his name never came up at the hearings. I'll spare you the long and tedious story of how my Manson reporting led to West, led me to West, except to say that I eventually learned that in 1967, when Manson transformed into the cult leader we are familiar with today, he and his followers were receiving free medical care at a clinic in San Francisco where West had established a base of operations for a research project he was conducting nearby. After becoming intrigued by the allegations against West, I learned that UCLA, his last academic home, had inherited his paper following his death in 1999. Nearly 2 months and more than 200 boxes later, I found the proverbial needle in a haystack: correspondence between West and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the architect of MKUltra. The letters begin in 1953, just 2 months after CIA Director Allen Dulles authorized the program, and while West was stationed at the Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, where he was chief psychiatrist at the base hospital. In his first letter to Gottlieb, West proposed conducting experiments on unwitting human subjects, including military personnel, prisoners, and psychiatric patients at the base hospital. He then outlined the experiments themselves in 6 more pages that could have been written by Joseph Mengele. Using LSD in combination with hypnosis, West proposed inducing confusion, amnesia, and specific mental disorders in people who would remember nothing of their interaction with him afterward. He sought to develop techniques to extract true information and implant false information in
Okay, I want to stop it right there. Okay, this is like something also that I think kind of ties back to some of what I was talking about with anchoring and imprinting certain types of memories into people. And I think this is also something that not only did they take it from a lot of the Afro-Caribbean trance religions and also like maybe even Congolese, African type religions and the Czar in Egypt. But I think also they may have taken this from occultists like Giordano Bruno and somewhere in the Middle Ages, people like Mesmer, to where anchoring somebody and then making them impressionable, maybe plying them with psychedelics in later terms, and imprinting like memories to where they start to identify these memories as a reality. This is probably something that was going on in during the 1980s during the Satanic Panic as well. And it's like something that goes all the way back to Giordano Bruno, the Memory Palace, and other sort of occultic techniques as well. So I think that's like interesting he mentioned that. I just had to like interject that.
willing subjects and to alter the attitudes and beliefs of peoples. In other words, to completely switch their allegiance from one group or leader to another. But it was another sentence at the end of that letter that stopped me cold. These experiments, he wrote, must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field. Gottlieb's response could hardly have been more enthusiastic. My good friend, he wrote, I had been wondering whether your apparent rapid and comprehensive grasp of our problems could possibly be real. You have indeed developed an admirably accurate picture of exactly what we are after. West replied that there was no more vital undertaking.
Oh, I just realized he's referencing G.A. Westbrook. The guy that I mentioned earlier that wrote the book on hypnotism is G.A. Estabrooks. Um, he's someone that was working with Ewan Cameron in Canada and working on the Montreal division of the MK Ultra, which I was in luck. I found this book that I've been looking for by Don Gilmore, which is I Swear by Apollo, the life of Ewan Cameron, which soon I'm probably going to break down on this like live stream, talking about this, looking into this book, and going to glean some information about MK Ultra and look into it and extract some of the vital essence of MK Ultra. But I promise you guys I won't use his techniques on anybody else. Not that I could. But anyway, going this goes back to kind of the Sidney Gottlieb I was talking about Sidney Gottlieb being sort of a black magician. And this is like something that I came to the conclusion reading about Sidney Gottlieb's life is that this guy is very much a black magician. This is a guy that immersed in study of chemicals and poisons. And this guy had all like the credentials of someone that could bring somebody into a dissociative state through chemical interaction and could definitely work on their mind and definitely develop techniques to break their mind and to build them back up, of course. One thing I will say is that they mention Operation Naomi in later times in this like congressional hearing. Operation Naomi is something I had not heard of until this congressional meeting. I'm being honest and transparent. I don't know everything. You know, I'm only your humble, like, simple parapolitical commentator trying to extract as much as I can from these things. I learned about it from this little commentary, from this little congressional hearing. It's one of the few things I learned that I can say that I didn't know previously to this. But yeah, let me get back into it.
Conceivable in these times. There was another document in West's papers that had even more significant implications. It was a 14-page report that West wrote in 1956, just 3 years after he contracted with the CIA. In the report, West described administering LSD and other drugs in conjunction with hypnosis on unwitting human subjects, and then he made a remarkable claim. He announced that he had learned how to replace true memories with false memories in people without their knowledge. In other words, he clarified, it has been found to be feasible to take the memory of a definite.
Okay, that one right there is a banger, and I want like people to like understand that's sort of like the key premise of this. Okay, that's sort of the key premise is that all this is about anchoring in memory and implanting like sort of false memories into people's subconscious. Um, and if you don't like, if you're skeptical of a lot of this stuff attached to occultism, the satanic panic, as I sort of am, that's one of the central takeaways is that if you can implant false memories into people, you can make them forget the reality presently as they're experiencing this. And this sort of ties into also to the 764, the com cults, the satanic internet cults that are going around presently right now is that what they are doing and they're utilizing the internet to do it is to flood people's mind with so much stimuli, with so much stuff, moment, and it gets anchored and submerged by another identity in another state. That's sort of how that works. And now, because they can control the internet and they can control sort of the consensus on the internet, they can start eradicating, memories from the past. That's why and also you have only so much, let's just say, space that AI now is like taking up. If you notice the cost of RAM, the cost of, let's just say, internal external hard drives has went up in so much to where people it's really starting to be cost prohibitive to like buy up memory. So in the future, I really think you can look at the internet as sort of like a memory board and also like as memory palace that I mentioned, to where like only so many memories sort of like can exist, and it's going to get to the point to where people's anchor themselves to to their reality on the internet, to where it distorts sort of the reality on the outside world. It's sort of the disastrous effects of what Nick Land is talking about in Hyperstition. How someone can usurp someone's like reality and just transfix themselves to like certain points of interest. So I want people to really, really, really emphasize that and to understand that's part of like the whole what made MK Ultra kind of like very very scary, and what makes potentially continuation of like MK Ultra very scary as well, and why I think stuff like 764 and some of these other operations that are online that are these cults that have formed to harm children, to promote the harm of like animals, to like psychologically sort of control people online, is something that I believe, and this is my speculation. I mean, all the major counter-terrorist people, all the major sort of like people out there will tell you, oh no, 764 is just a bunch of wild kids that are online that are subjecting each other to like all of this different torturous stimuli. It is not does not have any involvement with the CIA or the government or anything like that. But they'll tell you, of course, that snuff films are not real. Stuff that is discussed in Eye of the Chicken Hawk by Simon, I believe, Lovey. They'll tell you none of that shit is real either. So, I mean, who do you believe? But apparently it's serious enough, or maybe a limited hangout to be heard on congressional floors. Anyway, let's go.
Event in the life of an individual and through hypnotic suggestion bring about the subsequent conscious recall to the effect that this event never actually took place, but that a different fictional event actually did occur. If West's report was accurate, this was not the failure agency officials described in 1977, quite the opposite. It was, in fact, the central ambition of the MKUltra operation, the means of gaining the ability to seize the control of a person's perceptions, memories, and ultimately their behavior. But there was still one more discovery, and this time I found it in the National Security Archives at George Washington University, CIA's MKUltra records, which were released to Congress after the 1977 hearings. In those holdings was a different versions of West's 1956 report. The original paper had been replaced by a 4-page summary that did not exist in West's files and appears to have been written by someone else. His claims about replacing memories were gone. In their place was a theoretical discussion of LSD in dissociative states. The versions applied to Congress concluded that the effects of LSD and similar drugs on dissociative states had, and I'm quoting, never been studied. Never been studied. In the original report, West discusses observations from his own experiments, including detailed descriptions of using LSD to, as he wrote, speed the induction of the hypnotic state and deepen the trance in subjects. Those passages have been removed in the report turned over to Congress. The discrepancy could not have been more stark. Nearly 50 years ago, another congressional committee believed it had been given the truth about MKUltra. It had not. In conclusion, I respectfully submit that these records, some newly available and others that remained outside the government's disclosure for decades, warrant a thorough re-examination of what the program accomplished, what Congress was told, and what may still remain hidden. I'm happy to provide the documents I've referenced today, and I've provided many additional details in my written testimony.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I now recognize Elizabeth Genexi for her opening statement.
Chairman Luna and distinguished.
Okay, now that we got this woman with the National Institute of Health, I want you guys to note also that when she gets up to speak, and remember, we're like at the 37-minute and 52 mark on the congressional hearing. When she gets up to speak and she starts talking about the defunding of these special projects that, quote unquote, the National Institute of Health is running in the Congo and running in places that American citizens probably don't even care about, to be quite honest with you. She really starts, she says, she makes the erroneous comments that the American public really trusts and reveres and loves the National Institute of Health. And then she's sort of cross-examined by one of the, politicians, and they call her basically with no, not mincing words, they call her tone deaf after like she sits there and denies the connections to the NIH and also to that of like the connection to COVID and the connection to Anthony Fauci as well. So it's really sort of in a way and also very funny at the same time. But anyway, we'll listen to what she's saying. And even though she doesn't even mention MK Ultra one single time, she acts like the whole thing is non-existent and the NIH didn't have any involvement with MK Ultra.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm a health research scientist with a master's and doctoral degrees in psychology from the George Washington University. I spent 22 years from 2003 to 2025 as a scientific program official at the National Institutes of Health, managing more than $132 million in health research grants and co-authoring 18 federal funding programs. I left the NIH in April of 2025. I'm here today because what is happening to NIH right now is not reform. It is the replacement of political control. For 80 years, U.S. federal investment in biomedical research produced outcomes that no private market would have funded.
Okay. She says that the biomedical research would have produced results that no private market hadn't. Well, the truth is that there really isn't much separation. Then this is sort of a myth that we've like got ourselves into as American citizens. There's no different sort of there's no like delineation between the private and the public sector when it comes to the biomedical research or even the political sphere. These things are non existent because every one of these organizations, the way they skirt around any kind of public or governmental regulations is they create kind of a loophole to where they use private entities. If you know anything about how spycraft works or about how Gladio worked or about stuff like PMCs, private military contracting facilities, you'll know that there's always this loophole to where they create these private entities that are able to get funding from public sectors. So this is a misnomer on this woman's part stating this shit. I don't think she knows who she's fooling, this Dr. Gnexi woman um, at the National Institute of Health. I don't know if she thinks she's fooling. But I note also in this that she gets no applause from the crowd at all.
Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. NIH-funded research on blood pressure, cholesterol, and smoking drove a 56% decline in heart disease between 1950 and 1996. Cancer has been transformed. Treatments for breast, lung, prostate, and childhood cancers, along with immunotherapies that converted previously fatal diagnoses into manageable conditions, traced directly to NIH-funded research. HIV/AIDS were a death sentence in 1981. No pharmaceutical company saw a profitable market for treatments. NIH ran the trials that no one else would run. The result was antiretroviral therapy and pre-exposure prophylaxis. Global AIDS deaths have fallen 54% since 2010. Rare diseases that affect 30 million Americans get studied at the NIH because no market will fund that research. Every dollar that's appropriated to the National Institutes of Health generates $2.46 in economic output. NIH-supported work contributed to 354 of the 356 new drugs that the FDA approved between 2010 and 2019. Cutting the funding source of that pipeline does not slow it, it ends it. The proposed OMB federal financial assistance rule would give political appointees authority to terminate funded grants at any time without cause, including ongoing clinical trials with enrolled patients. This is not a hypothetical. NIH has already terminated or frozen thousands of grants, including hundreds of ongoing clinical trials since January 2025, concentrated in infectious disease, vaccine, and health disparities research.
Okay, there you go. The magic words: vaccines, health disparities, and clinical studies. You know what this means basically? Let's experiment on poor people. Let's experiment in the global south. And let's experiment on people that basically don't have any kinds of control or representation or money to defend themselves and are dying of debilitating diseases. Let's take advantage of them so we can make more money for Big Pharma. That's basically what this means. That's the secret, coded language that I'm deciphering for you with what this, Ginger Nexus or Ginger Rex here is saying. I'm just going to call her Ginger Rex. Ginger Rexosaurus here is telling you that invest money into your own demise so we can keep doing more vaccine trials and develop more bioweapons so we can, cull the herd a little bit, maybe, right?
This proposed rule will make that authority permanent. The NIH director has eliminated the merit score thresholds that once protected peer review and political appointee peer review outcomes to screen grants for alignment with administrative priorities. The proposed OMB rule will also severely restrict international research. We're managing an H5N1 bird flu outbreak that has more than 70 documented human cases. We recently concluded a hantavirus response that required CDC scientists working alongside Argentina. The current Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic.
Oh boy. You know what? Ebola's been breaking out in Central Africa and all these places since I've been a kid. And the same thing is true for all the hantavirus and all this the rest of this stuff. You know, the truth of it is, I mean, for all the good, supposed good that the NIH does, they're probably just utilizing these places as living laboratories. And they basically want the American taxpayers to shell out money for their own demise without ever questioning and ever mentioning how, in the past, this is the irony of the whole thing, is that MK Ultra demonstrated to us that we should be very concerned on how, these various different things are being utilized against us to the point to where we should be overly concerned to the point also that if you rewind the tape a little bit, you'll see there's a certain somebody in the backdrop, maybe later in the tape, that is a certain podcaster named Steven Snyder, aka Recluse. You'll see him in the backdrop as well, just to mention that. But anyway, let's continue.
Republic of Congo
This woman
is now the third largest on record and is
making me go to
outpacing
sleep.
containment efforts. This rule will curtail exactly that kind of cooperation that we need.
It doesn't.
NIH lost 1,112 PhD trained workers from 2025 to early 26. More than half of the NIH institutes right now are operating without permanent scientific leadership. The majority of its advisory councils required by statute to provide independent oversight have lost more than half of their members. The fundamental choice before this Congress is between a system where scientists make scientific judgments through accountable processes and one where political appointees make those calls instead. That choice will determine Whether the next breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's, antibiotic resistance, and pandemic defense will happen here or perhaps not at all. I urge this committee to support a joint resolution of disapproval to block the proposed OMB financial assistance rule. That authority to replace peer review with political approval has not been granted by Congress and
Dr.
should not
Janeski, your
be.
time's expired. I'll be now going to myself for
Thank you
5
very
minutes
much.
of questioning. Thank you, ma'am. My first question is for Mr. O'Neill. MK Naomi.
Hey, brutal. By the way, brutal. I will say that that was brutal right there. Notice how basically they got her off the microphone and told her to shut up. Basically, she's boring. Maybe the MIH, the NIH can send somebody like more enthusiastic, that could actually like speak instead of this woman, instead of Gingersaurus Rex, who Pedro said in the comment section, looks like an effeminate fucking Woody Allen. I mean, seriously, you look like if you're pitching something that like you wouldn't. It would be bad fucking publicity and press to like go in the middle of an MK Ultra meeting and then try to pitch the NIH. I mean, that would be fucking shitty PR. What were these people thinking? I mean, maybe that's good that like the NIH, did this like publicity movement, um, because it sort of exposed them to the point to where, I mean, this is like stupid on all accords. This is just like really, really bad PR. This is like a PR fumble in many regards. But anyway, I believe next they're going to talk about MK Naomi that I mentioned that I was unaware of at the time that I heard this congressional hearing. So I want people to like note the MK Naomi if you're really like interested in researching MK Naomi. Remember, this stream is sort of like I'm collecting data for not only the audience, but myself. We're sort of like doing a deep dive into this at the same time and looking into these things and trying to discover some of the intricacies of MK Ultra itself. So MK Naomi is like something uh, that I'm planning on looking at that I actually didn't know about. Maybe the people out there in the audience did know about MK Naomi. I sure as hell didn't know about it. But I believe it was a joint venture between the CIA and also with the CIA as well for biomedical weapons. Kind of interesting, right? Anyway, let's continue.
The joint CIA Army program that ran parallel with MKUltra at Fort Detrick appears to have been run with deliberate minimal documentation. Army records on Special Operations Division have apparently been destroyed. In your investigation, what did you learn about MK Naomi, and do you believe its activities were even more serious than what we know about MKUltra?
I'm sorry. I didn't learn anything about those operations. I kept my focus mostly on Dr. West and his work. I do know that the only reason I found the documents I found was because Dr. West accidentally left them in his papers, and he probably did that because he corresponded with Gottlieb under Gottlieb's assigned alias, which was Sherman Grifford, and he went to a post office box here under Foss Corporation.
Thank
So
you, Mr. I'm just going to real quick go to
Okay.
Dr. Kinzer. Are you aware of anything that exists with MK Naomi in your research? And if you could please press the button.
My understanding of MK Naomi is that it was a joint project between the military and the CIA. And there's a big difference because the MK Ultra project was aimed at seizing control of the minds of individuals. The Army was interested in something different, which was trying to use biological agents in warfare against entire populations. So MK Naomi.
Okay, let me say also that what's also interesting is this is there was an operation in India, I believe, where the CIA had infected various different vectors of mosquitoes with malaria and unleashed them on the population. And it's been alleged that they were doing this also in the deep south, also releasing vectors of mosquitoes to infect people with malaria and with other various biological agents. I think also recently it's come up in the news that they want to do away with a certain type of mosquito that is infesting the marshlands of Florida. So a lot of people, I used to think this was like beyond the pale that entomology would be utilized alongside with different operations to infect populations with diseases. I used to think this was total boulder dash until I looked into it, and apparently it is very much real and something that has been utilized and done by the government on a regular basis for like almost like since the 1950s now. So I don't know. The Plum Island stuff seemed a little bit out there, but you have to understand there are multiple different components to this MK Ultra thing. It isn't just about breaking the mind or mind control. There are other facets too that no doubt they're going to utilize this data for scientific research. Just like they used Unit 731, is it 721, the Japanese unit that was experimenting on the Chinese at the time during World War II? I think it was Unit 721. But 721 during World War II, which did atrocities that would make the Nazis blush, basically were utilized by the American medical establishment. Their data, their raw data, was taken from the Japanese scientist and also utilized for scientific and medical research. Trust science. Anything for medical or scientific innovation. And soon we're going to have data centers and AI everywhere that's just going to slaughter and the life stream out of us. Thanks, science. Thank you, innovation. Thanks for making me a feudal peasant in a free country. Thank you.
Is the place where these two goals overlapped.
And that was the 1953 Frank Olson death. Was that in a way tied to that from some chatter that we had seen in?
Exactly what the motivation was behind the decision about Frank Olson, if there was such a decision, is unknown.
My next question is also for you, sir. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 German scientists into the United States government after World War II, including individuals who had conducted human experimentation in concentration camps. The CIA and military were aware of their backgrounds and recruited them anyways. In your research, did you find direct documentation between Paperclip scientists and the development of MKUltra's experimental protocols, specifically the use of mescaline, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation, which were techniques also documented at Dachau?
Absolutely. Kurt Blome, who was the chief of biological weapons development for the Nazi government, came to work for the CIA. So did Walter Schreiber, who was the Surgeon General of the Nazi army. I can just tell a brief story. When I was researching my book, I found what I think might be the first secret CIA prison or black site. It's a nice chalet in Germany.
Okay, this is interesting. So not only were they bringing over Operation Paperclip people, I should also note also as well that at the time the Nazis were also doing research into cancer cures as well. That's kind of interesting. That's glossed over. In addition to that, he also mentions that Stephen Kinzer mentions that they found the world's first CIA black site in Germany. So already post World War II, the CIA was working on not only Gladio at the time, which is Operation Bluebird. No, sorry, not Operation Bluebird. Operation Jet Lag. Yeah, it's Operation Bluebird. Was a part of, I believe early Gladio, and maybe even like MK Ultra. In addition to that, Project Artichoke, which I'm going to like probably discuss later on. Like this is going to be do a deep dive on the MK Ultra history. I'm going to definitely look further into all this and get into Artichoke and break all this shit down for you, dear audience. Because I think you guys should be informed about all this shit. You shouldn't let, we shouldn't not be aware of this stuff and have to do like a congressional meeting for us to all know this kind of stuff. I think it's important for like just regular citizens like us to like know all this stuff, and that's the service I'm trying to provide for everybody, is trying to bridge that gap with the everyday person to explore this sort of information. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. The first CIA black site is in Germany, mentioned by Stephen Kinzer here, who was the biography of the Sidney Gottlieb. Well, and look into that. I definitely want to get into Ewan Cameron as well. I want to get into like his life as well, and look into the whole psychic driving stuff. Um, Even go into like some really weird speculation about Havana syndrome, gang stalking, and the CIA and MK Ultra, which I know is everybody's favorite topic. But anyway, let's continue.
And the guy who now owns it took me into the basement. He said these were the cells where the MK Ultra officers, working side by side with Nazis, carried out those gruesome experiments, which were actually just continuations of the experiments that those Nazis had been conducting just a few years earlier right down the road.
Just for timeline and clarification, these experiments were happening after the Nuremberg trials, correct? So the CIA would have known that these were crimes against humanity.
I looked for an episode in which the Nuremberg doctrines were posted on the wall in some MK Ultra or CIA office, and I was never able to find any indication that those Nuremberg principles ever were even consulted, much less obeyed.
Thank you. My next question would be for either witness to comment, Dr. Kinzer or Mr. O'Neill. Both witnesses have written about the psychiatrist Louis Leib, who ran MK Ultra program for the CIA, hired West as a contractor to conduct research for subproject 43, combining hypnotism, drugs, and sensory deprivation to create dissociative states, in which, to quote Mr. Kinzer in his book Poisoner in Chief, the human mind could be pulled away from its moorings. Following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, West psychiatrically examined Jack Ruby, then in prison for murdering the president accused of the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald. The assassin accused Lee Harvey Oswald. A report emerged from West's examination said that Ruby had suffered an acute psychotic break. Can you explain why Dr. West in particular was chosen to conduct an examination of Jack Ruby alone in his jail cell with no other psychologist present?
Be happy to. West inserted himself into the case when Ruby was the day of the shooting, the day after the shooting.
Okay, this is interesting also. Tim O'Neill goes, and I don't mean to like disrupt like every moment, but I feel like I have to highlight certain points of all this that are also like interest to parapolitical researchers out there. He makes a comment that that Jolly and West inserted himself into the Jack Ruby case. Further, Tim O'Neill explains that Jack Ruby was potentially also MK Ultra himself, and was one of the MK Ultra experiments that is not often talked about. It makes you wonder also how many other people were also potential MK Ultra subjects during the 1960s and 70s that had all these like weird, really weird sort of assassination attempts. Also, it makes you wonder about the whole Thomas Crooks thing as well. and the whole like internet stuff that is going on now with 764 and the various different Discord groups, which a lot of people discount. But I still contend that perhaps a lot of this psychological manipulation that was done by MK Ultra experimentation may have been transferred into some of these extortionist groups. And some of these techniques are being used to justify a lot of the FBI and a lot of the intelligence agencies to justify their funding against extremism. And a lot of this is like kind of an orchestrated myth that goes hand in hand with our society. That's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing a lot of the sacred cows that we hold dear and hold so evident that we have to like create and alter like the so-called alphabet agencies have our best interest, and also the terrorist prevention research centers are really just charlatans and really just grifting operations that don't do anything to curtail extremism or terrorism. And in most likelihood, a lot of the a lot of the terrorist acts themselves might be a product of American, deep states type of operations. Quote unquote false flags, as they say. Damn, I'm starting to sound like a boomer. I hate it. I hate it. I'm starting to sound like a damn boomer. But anyway, let me continue.
Approached the judge in the preliminary hearings and asked to be assigned to the case. He was refused by the judge. After Ruby was convicted at his first trial, an associate of West, Dr. Hubert Winston Smith, who was a psychiatrist and an attorney, took over Ruby's defense for his appeal, and he had already discussed appointing Ruby to the case, or excuse me, West to the case. And as you said, West examined Ruby alone at the jail cell and emerged to announce that in the preceding 48 hours he had an acute psychotic break from which he would never recover. He had been declared competent to stand trial the first time by a panel of, I think, 8 psychiatrists. This psychotic break lasted until his death in 1967. 2 months after West examined him, Ruby testified for the first time and only time to the Warren Commission, and it was the first time he ever publicly was supposed to say what his reasons were for shooting Oswald. The testimony had to be halted because he was babbling incoherently, and as Arlen Specter, who was a counsel to the commission, wrote in his memoirs, he pulled him aside and said that they were cutting off the arms and legs of children in Albuquerque and El Paso, and he said he was making no sense whatsoever. West, in his letters to Gottlieb from 1953, discussed experiments where he would induce specific mental disorders in people. A year before the Kennedy assassination, he publicly spoke in Oklahoma City and talked about his LSD experiments inducing psychiatric breaks and psychosis in people with the use of LSD, which of course later contradicted.
All right, I want to highlight that also. I am kind of skeptical if like someone can incite like psychiatric people or induce them to psychosis like that. What I'm suggesting is what they do in many instances is they like to imprint and also anchor certain types of memories into people's minds to where it overcrowds other memories and sort of anchors itself to a certain type of identity to where it's suggestive enough to for which if it's done long enough does maybe drive someone into a state of psychosis or makes them assume another identity if you're able to like desensitize them for most of like the experimentation. So you have also the desensitization that comes with isolation. So they oftentimes when like ICU patients or people that are like in solitary confinement, they become depersonalized So this is a very similar thing that goes on with like MK Ultra victims as they get depersonalized, desensitized, and usually the only stimuli that's available to them is sort of this anchoring process to where these memories are implanted in their mind over and over again, and through repetition they start to develop a new identity, which is largely at the control of people like Sidney Gottlieb, who at the time had pretty much carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do. And it's kind of interesting also how Jolly and West is fraternizing with uh, Sidney Gottlieb at the same time, and they're sort of exchanging and changing notes to one another, giving one another like techniques to sort of anchor and imprint these thoughts into people's minds. And he's also talking about in 1967 when Jack Ruby comes up to the Warren Commission to talk about his assassination of like Lee Harvey Oswald. He's babbling incoherently. He's talking about kids in El Paso and all these different places that are pulling off the limbs of these like kids. So kind of interesting how this is like going on simultaneously with the Warren Commission happening and also with the Lee Harvey Oswald case. And there is like Tim O'Neill says that there's like potential that like there is some foul play that's going on with Jolly and West. And listen, I'm willing to like entertain Jolly and West might have been a very nefarious character because he's in all of these different extremist cases. He's in the Timothy McVeigh case. He's in the Ted K case. He's in the Manson case. He's everywhere. So obviously, he's trying to extract certain kind of data. I would also posit that psychiatrists also like to study people that have certain types of antisocial personality disorders. They want to know how to control these people. Because, listen, American society loves people with antisocial personality disorder. They love the ASPD people. Americans love ASPD. I mean, for Christ's sakes, most self help gurus, most cult leaders probably score very high on narcissism and ASPD. And I don't want to be like one of these people like psychoanalyzes people. But that's a really dark truth we have to like come to grips with in American society. And I think that makes us a little uncomfortable. But anyway, let's continue. But I thought that was interesting what he said about Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald as well, about how the potential on the congressional floor. We're talking about Jack Ruby now being MK Ultra by Tim O'Neill, who's not the most reliable source, but it's kind of interesting that he disclosed that. Anyway, let's continue.
What he told the New York Times when he said he never used LSD in animal experimentation.
What an interesting connection. I'm out of time, but I'll be now recognizing Mr. Burleson from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your diligent work on this, and hopefully we will hear back from the CIA on those boxes of documents that have so many questions about. Dr. Kinzer and Mr. O'Neill, the CIA created MK Ultra in 1953, supposedly out of fear that the Soviet Union and China had developed mind control capabilities. Let me go back a little bit further. So one of my questions has to do with the event that happened in 1951 in August. There was a bakery that I guess the people that lived in that community, over 250, some say 300 people were poisoned from the bread. It was determined that that was LSD that was causing all of these people to hallucinate. Some people died. Is there any connection, Dr. Kinzer, to that event? And was that something that either inspired the MK Ultra program or the MK Naomi program, or is that something that we were involved in even that early on?
I would turn that question back to you. I don't think anybody really knows the full story of what happened at that time in that town in France. That the United States could have been involved, that this could have been part of what was then called Operation Artichoke, the predecessor for not beyond the realm of possibility.
Note, Operation Artichoke. That's something to note. That was the predecessor for MK Ultra. And by the way, Project Monarch, and I repeat, Project Monarch has been debunked. Project Monarch was a distractor to Project Artichoke and to Project Jet Lag, and also to Bluebird, Operation Bluebird as well. These were like all psychological operations that were ran up to like MK Ultra.
There's a lot of overlap between the ergot enzyme that is the basis of LSD and certain rye and wheat funguses that can be used in breads. Was that something intentional? Was it something the Americans were involved in? I have my suspicions, but just based on my background as a journalist, I don't operate on suspicions. So I would love to see more investigation of that episode.
My next question has to do with once the program began. I think one of the most shocking things that we've determined is the Operation Midnight Climax that occurred in the early 1950s, 60s, where the CIA had safe houses, and there was, I would say, Dr. Kinzer. I mean, this is extremely disturbing behavior that was happening, where you had American citizens who were being lured into these like brothels and then dosed with an hallucinogenic and then filmed during their sex. Was there anyone prosecuted for these crimes?
No, there have been no prosecutions for any crime related to MK Ultra, as far as I know. To me, the remarkable aspect of that Operation Midnight Climax was that there wasn't even the pretense of scientific experimentation. The person watching behind the one-way mirror was a grossly overweight drug officer sitting on a portable toilet and drinking cocktails out of a pitcher. There was nobody there that was a scientist or somebody who understood sexual behavior or human psychology. So there was no science involved in it at all. I can add a little footnote. When I was researching Poisoner-in-Chief, I came across a document in which one of the officers involved in setting up that program, Operation Midnight Climax, said that Sidney Gottlieb himself used to fly from Washington out to inspect the project regularly and always asked that women be provided for him. So
that was my next question.
Oh, that's rather interesting. Sidney Gottlieb, while doing the Operation Midnight Climax, actually was a bit of an Epstein figure. Funny how that like goes together with a lot of these different CIA operations. Interesting. Interesting. In addition to that, we also see that like the person that was involved with Operation Climax weren't even like, scientists. They were like just slovenly agents that were, looking and probably masturbating to a lot of the stuff that was going on in Operation Climax because they were looking at these people like have sex and getting high off like LSD. So these people are like, they got all these prostitutes to do this in Operation Climax in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they're basically having sex. Some grossly overweight guy was looking at them, in the behind a two-way fucking mirror and probably masturbating. I mean, for some people, I guess online, I suppose that's a dream job, but doesn't sound too good to me.
Do you think that the agents were involved in the sexual encounters?
Well, and could that have actually been the reason why the bordello was opened? There was no prospect of any serious scientific result out of that project, given the personnel who were overseeing it. So those CIA officers, particularly Gottlieb, involved in overseeing Operation Midnight Climax, certainly were able to take advantage of what it offered.
Thank you. And my last question, first I want to say thank you to Mr. O'Neill. The book Chaos, I checked it out from the Library of Congress and greatly appreciate your work there. I was intrigued by one of the statements that you made based on your research that the MKUltra program, they were actually successfully able to replace memories. And because of that, I'm wondering if, and Dr. Kinzer, you can chime in if you have any knowledge of this, did the program continue, and do you think that the program in some aspect is still continuing today?
You're asking if the program continued after 1973 when
That's
it was halted, supposedly. I honestly, that's a question I'm asked at almost every appearance I do. Is it happening today? Did it continue? I don't know. I can't imagine that it didn't, though, because the technology that they worked to establish over 20, 25 years and spent more money on than any operation the CIA ever pulled.
And this is something where I am going to agree with Tim O'Neill. I do believe MK Ultra never stopped, and I do believe this stuff, the psychological operations online with 764 and with other sort of various different, online cults, I believe is probably a continuation of MK Ultra. And if it's not, it certainly has all the benchmarks of it. And I'll mention something else that's rather interesting and has a loose connection and tie to MK Ultra is that Satanist and neo-Nazi Joshua Caleb Sutter was highly obsessed with MK Ultra, with Project Monarch, with Operation Artichoke, Project Artichoke, with Operation, all of these different like psychological operations. He encapsulated and made it into something like with Temple of Blood, which is supposed to be half satirical and integrated in with the O9A and in with other sort of satanic practices. So I find it kind of interesting that this guy was an informant and a snitch for the FBI, and part of these connections to these comm networks that 764 is a part of. Anyway, let's continue.
Imagine it's being used. I have no evidence of it being used, so it's a complete assumption.
I would just add that one of the letters to which Mr. O'Neill referred contains a quote from Mr. Gottlieb saying that these experiments were necessary, quote, in these times. I think it's important to put yourself back in that mindset where the United States felt that it was under such overwhelming threat that the loss of a few lives or a few hundred lives was a small price to pay. Commitment to a great cause is one of the most fundamental justifications for committing immoral acts. And patriotism is among the most noble of causes. It can be twisted and it can be used as an excuse to carry out research under the guise that this is simply research we're doing to protect ourselves against others. And I think that is a mindset that may still be active in some parts of our government.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Madam Chair. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Burleson. I now recognize myself. Thank you to the witnesses for coming today to testify about MK Ultra. Dr. Genexi, you said you worked for the NIH, is that correct?
Oh, this guy is going to really go into Dr. Genexi, who works for the NIH. You're going to see also that nobody sympathizes with her at all in the audience. And even like the crooked politicians up there that are probably no better than the NIH people. Remember, these are like weirdo politicians that have their own skeletons in the closet and probably don't give two shits about the American public either, or Americans. But they really dig into like this woman, Selexi, or whatever hell her name is, Jalexi, whatever the hell her name is, with the NIH. And the audience is especially not sympathetic. But let's continue.
That is correct.
And you left in 2025?
That is correct.
I noticed during your opening statement that you had nothing to say about the content of this hearing being about MK Ultra. Your statement seemed to be based more on your issues with this administration's attempt to reform and rein in the NIH. Is that a fair assessment of your opening statement?
My opening statement was talking about the destruction of the NIH and cancellation of grants and political control of the NIH.
Would you deny that the NIH had involvement in the funding of the Wuhan lab?
I don't have any knowledge about any funding related to the Wuhan lab.
So are you denying that the NIH?
I'm
funded
basically
the
here to
Wuhan
talk
lab?
about what's happening right now at the NIH and how we really should be letting science be driven by scientists and not by politicians.
Well, do you-
Because that's how we fund
Yes, guys, trust the science. Trust the scientist. They know what's good for you.
cures and make health progress.
Well, with all due respect, ma'am, do you find it ironic that for years we were
Make cures, yeah, like anyone in the medical industry wants to make a cure. I think they'd mostly be out of jobs if that was the case.
told to trust the science, and then in the aftermath, we've all found out that most of what we were told during COVID was a complete lie, and it wasn't scientific at all?
The number one thing that I think that we're doing to destroy trust in American science right now is canceling clinical trials. In the middle of those clinical trials, this does incredible harm to the patients who are receiving experimental treatments, and it really destroys the trust that we have in how do we recruit patients for future trials if they are knowing that their trials could just be simply canceled for political reasons.
I don't think anybody up here would deny that there's never been anything good that's come out of the NIH and that you guys have done some good work, but you just brought up trust. Do you think the NIH has a trust problem based on how they handled COVID?
No, I do not. I think that the NIH
Listen to that shit. She basically sits there and defends how the NIH defended, how they acted during COVID. She sits there basically, that's this on top of this is like just shitty PR for like her, for who she's a spokesman of. But in addition to that, she sits there and says that the NIH acted in the most professional manner during like the whole COVID-19 bullshits. Yeah, okay. All right. Sure.
is beloved by the American people because we know
NIH is beloved by the American people. I mean, damn, that's a laugh riot.
about the advances in human health and cancer treatments and heart disease and diabetes and all of the health gains that the research has produced.
Well, I think you're wrong, ma'am. I think the public has a serious mistrust issue with the NIH. Do you deny that the NIH tried to cover up the origin of COVID?
I'm not here to testify about that. That's not my area of science.
Do you believe that the NIH supported masking and social distancing when there was really no science to support that?
What I'm more concerned about is what's happening right now to destroy the Biomedical Research Institute that has been the envy of the world. And right now, we're ceding our leadership in biomedical research to China. That's what's happening right now.
What about covering up harmful side effects of the NIH's plate in that? What do you have to say about that, ma'am?
The U.S. history of human subjects protection has evolved greatly. Numerous research improprieties from the 50s to the 70s in the United States, including the Tuskegee syphilis study, forced Congress to establish formally federally
I'm not asking you about that.
mandated rules.
You know what I'm asking you about? I'm asking you about how NIH handled. It's supposed to be a hearing about MK Ultra, but when you gave your opening statement, and I don't even know why you were called to this hearing because you didn't offer anything about MK Ultra. But since you are here and you're going to defend NIH, I'm going to call you out on it.
Okay, I don't like politicians. I don't like these like stuffed shirt people at this procession. But this woman is like kind of an oddity. She's just there to like glaze the NIH and to defend the NIH and to try to get them funding in Congress. And like I mentioned, this is like really peculiar and odd that there was some kind of NIH woman at an MK Ultra hearing to disclose MK Ultra like documents, and this is like really weird. This is like really strange. This woman is here. What is her purpose other than just to get funding for more biomedical research? Probably to like run cover for whatever the private sector is doing for medical experimentation that was started by MK Ultra. So I think in many ways she was probably planted here. She was a type of plant, type of a kind of limited hangout herself to like distract people from what's going on with the MK Ultra stuff. So I think that's kind of what she's there for, and it's very peculiar that in the middle of all this, she's there to distract and to divert attention away with like MK Ultra. She has contributed nothing to like the discourse of MK Ultra. She's just sitting there defending the NIH the entire time. What's the purpose of this fucking woman being there? I mean, seriously, why is she there? Why is like effeminate Woody Allen there in the first fucking place? She has no purpose there. She has no business being there.
Do you see now what I'm talking about when you say that the NIH doesn't have integrity problems and trust issues? Did you hear the applause in this room? That should tell you right now that you're pretty tone deaf to what the public thinks about how the NIH handled COVID and the cover up, not only the funding of it, but the cover up involved in the aftermath. Can you acknowledge that?
I'm sorry, that's not my understanding.
Who's,
Look at that shit. Like nobody clapped for this like NIH bitch. Nobody clapped for this bitch. Like only one person clapped for this stupid bitch right in the middle of this like MK Ultra meeting. Like nobody fucking clapped for this bitch. Like everybody clapped against her in the audience. Like clearly, honestly, this woman is tone deaf. That's gotta be the most awkward fucking Congress procession yet. The most congressional hearing yet. That's gotta be the most awkward one yet. Um oh shit.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Ms. Boebert for the next round of questioning.
Oh,
Thank you,
no,
Mr.
not
Chairman,
Miss
and
Boebert.
thank you to two of our witnesses who are here to actually talk on our subject here today. Mr. Kinzer, in your book, Poisoner in Chief, you describe how Project MKUltra was authorized by CIA Director Alan Dulles.
Kind of off topic, but there's some interesting stuff with Boebert. I'm not going to mention. Let's just say she had some nice fancy handwork in an opera house with her husband or boyfriend. You know, she has some interesting history herself. Oh man, never mind. Out of control. I don't want to like say it. Anyway, go ahead.
In April of 1953 as an umbrella program for research into the covert use of biological and chemical materials for mind control and interrogation. What specific geopolitical and intelligence concerns, particularly regarding alleged Soviet and Chinese, quote, brainwashing and Korean War prisoners, drove this authorization? And how did Cindy Gottlieb's unique background and personality and worldwide view shape the program's direction and methods and ethical boundaries?
Let me start by answering your second question about Gottlieb. He was a very different person from all of the other senior CIA officers of that era. Most of them came from silver spoon backgrounds. They went to the same prep schools and the same Ivy League colleges and belonged to the same yacht clubs and worked for the same law firms and international banks. Sidney Gottlieb was the son of Orthodox Jewish refugees from Central Europe. He had a limp. He had a stutter. He went to Hebrew school. He was so different from all of the other officers. And upon reflection, I think this may not have been an accident. I think that people at the CIA understood that whoever had this job was going to be doing some awful, terrible things that would be very bloody, that they might become known, and it might be necessary to blame it all on somebody. And they didn't want to have to blame it all on one of their own. So Gottlieb actually became the person on whom everything was blamed. In fact, when he testified in secret here in Congress in the 1970s, he complained that there were documents on which various signatures had been redacted, but his alone had remained. So, again, is a way of diverting attention away from the institutional responsibility of the CIA and trying to blame it on one crazy person. As for the international situation at the time, I think it's very important to parallel to today. The CIA misinterpreted several key incidents in the world, including those to which you referred, the trial of the Cardinal Mindszenty, and then in Hungary, and then the return of Korean War prisoners. Neither of those episodes really had to do with mind control, but in the CIA, they were interpreted that way. And this gave the CIA a reason to pretend that its research was purely defensive. So I think when you consider the world situation and the sense in Washington that we're surrounded by enemies, that becomes a very dangerous environment. Conspiracy theories stem from the growth of the covert sphere. There's a great contradiction in American life that we pretend to uphold certain principles at home and abroad, but it's evident to many Americans that we actually operate in opposition to those principles. And we operate by secret and anti-democratic means. That contributes to suspicion of government. And the very existence of MK proves that some of the wildest fantasies about secret government research are actually close to reality. That makes the paranoid mindset seem ever more rational.
Thank you. And I'm going to have to cut off several of my questions now, but that was very intriguing, so I wanted you to continue. MK Ultra ultimately encompassed at least 149 sub-projects involving more than 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies, often funded through cutout foundations to conceal CIA sponsorship. Can you detail how these funding and operational security mechanisms?
Okay. What I guess Bobert yogurt, as somebody said in the in the chat said, and yes, I'm gonna call her Bobert yogurt. I'm sorry if that offends you. But what she's saying basically, despite the fact, me making that really shitty political joke, um, basically what she's saying here is she's stating that through these various different like medical corps, a lot of these fake kind of governmental entities, and through like the private spaces into the public sector and the private sector. There's various different like of these like CIA cutouts, which were fronts for MK Ultra and also fronts for many of the various different machinations of one and only Mr. Sidney Gottlieb, who is the mad black magician and chemist. And I do emphasize mad, black magician and chemist, Sidney Gottlieb, working his magic through these various different CIA cutouts with no supervision from the CIA or any overhead at all. But, this is like something that people should be more acquainted with Sidney Gottlieb is like, he was really a mad individual, and he never got punished for any of these human rights abuses he perpetuated. And in my opinion, I'm going to say this: Epstein is not an upstanding individual. But Sidney Gottlieb, I think, makes Epstein seem like, in my opinion, kindergarten. Maybe that's in poor taste saying that, but yeah, Sidney Gottlieb is like a real shitbag of a person, a real diabolical person as well. In many cases, I think Jeffrey Epstein probably wished he was Sidney Gottlieb in many instances. Because Sidney Gottlieb probably was some dark occultist, unlike Jeffrey Epstein, who was like halfway shitty occultist and just a kind of a glorified, uh, extorter. And so I think, Sidney Gottlieb, it'd be interesting to see if Sidney Gottlieb had any more previous sort of intelligence connections, to be quite honest with you. So Sidney Gottlieb was the real deal when it came to like being an evil sort of entity with large, domain to do whatever he wanted. And you know what I'm going to say this is that I don't especially like the medical industry. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to say medicine itself is bad, but I think a lot of the people that get into medicine, such as doctors and even nurses, a lot of them are low key psychopaths, in my opinion. And I'll just say that. I say this because I've worked around these types of people. And I haven't found too many of them that are pleasant to be around. So, anyway, let's continue. But I want to emphasize the whole aspect about CIA cutouts and how they were fronts for MK Ultra. I'm quite enjoying this series. I think I'm going to continue on this MK Ultra sort of trail. I haven't felt this like passionate about something in a while, and I'm going to continue this. Anyway, let's go.
And then just another subset, if I don't get back to asking a question, did the CIA or government or any of these entities ever say that what they were doing with MK Ultra and mind control were productive or for the betterment of humanity? Did they ever make those claims? Thank you.
As for your second question, I'm not aware, other than in private communications, that the CIA ever claimed that it had made great advances under MK Ultra, because it largely denied that MK Ultra ever existed. As for the foundations, yeah, these are Sidney Gottlieb created a couple of bogus foundations. They're called cutouts in CIA slang, and these are foundations that appear to be independent, but actually are fully funded and controlled by the CIA. It was those foundations.
So, not to be condescending, but some of the audience that is kind of unaware of spycraft or CIA terminology or spook terminology, spook language, spooky language, cutout is a very important term that all you guys need to learn, especially if you're involved in any kind of political activism, because cutouts can happen online. And cutouts can be groups, and cutouts are a real thing, and espionage is a real thing, and spooks are everywhere.
That approached hospitals and clinics and asked them to become involved in research, particularly into LSD. So many of the institutions where these experiments took place did not even realize that those foundations were actually covers for the CIA.
Chair, I yield.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Mace from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Dr. Janexi, you work with the NIH, correct?
No, I am no longer affiliated with the NIH.
When did you leave the NIH?
April of last year.
April of last year. Did you ever speak with Anthony Fauci or any of your NIH colleagues when you were there about the NIH's role in funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the development of COVID-19 virus?
No.
Do you believe that the NIH or Dr. Fauci lied to the American people about COVID?
No.
Are you familiar with Dr. Fauci's statements to Congress about COVID?
No.
You didn't watch any of Dr. Fauci. You worked at the NIH and you didn't watch any of Dr. Fauci's.
No, I did not work at NIAID.
Okay. Do you think that the COVID shots harm American citizens?
No, I do not.
Do you think that the COVID shots cause turbo cancers?
No.
Have you read any? Do you know if the NIH or NIAID track COVID shot injuries or cancers or anything harmful from them?
I am not aware of any harmful tracking, and this is not my area of expertise, no.
What is your area of expertise?
I'm a research psychologist, and I did not work at NIAID.
And you're here for what reason?
I am here to testify about what is happening to the NIH right now.
You're not here to testify about MK Ultra?
I am not an MK Ultra expert,
Why did the Dems send you here if you're not an MK Ultra expert?
but I am an expert in human.
Okay, see, there we go right there. Why the hell did they send this Dr. Janexi to an MK Ultra meeting? What was the purpose of that? That's why I said this is just like also odd that she was like sent in the middle of like an MK Ultra investigation on the congressional floor. So this woman like just sort of like stands out, and it just doesn't make any sense why they send these like people right in the middle of like this like whole discussion on MK Ultra when people are trying to come down to it. She's sitting there rallying for like the NIH to like get funding. So like this is like a very peculiar thing to do. It's not only bad, like I mentioned previously, it's not only bad like PR for like the NIH, but it's just odd to send somebody out there that's not an MK Ultra expert, that like doesn't have any rudimentary knowledge about MK Ultra, and she's just sitting there, just trying to talk about all these vaccine trials, all these clinical trials, and how the NIH it's so great and it cures cancer and it cures diabetes. It's just awesome. Like it just doesn't make any sense. It's just stupid.
Subjects protection, which is related, and in the conduct of human subjects research.
Okay. But you don't know anything about MK Ultra, which is the purpose of this hearing. All right, so I have a couple questions for our witnesses who are here to talk about MK Ultra, and thank you, gentlemen, Dr. Kinzer and Mr. O'Neill. What are some of the worst abuses that you're aware of in the MK Ultra program?
I can start by just naming, I'll talk about one in particular that always sticks in my mind. In the federal prison in Lexington, Kentucky, a group of African-American inmates was segregated and fed what were described in the protocol as double.
Okay, this is an interesting history in MK Ultra that I think is at least not very well explored. And I've been going for like 2 hours and 30 minutes. This is actually longer than I wanted to, but there was just so much like meat in this whole commentary that in this whole like congressional hearing that I wanted to go over. So I've went over and extended some of my basically limited. I only wanted to do about an hour, like 2 hours, but what the hell? But this is like a very interesting a little piece of American history that's not discussed. So during the 1920s and 1930s, there was a epidemic of heroin addicts, and we had a bit of an opiate crisis in America. So in response to this, what happened was is they decided to open up something called the Lexington Narco Farm. They opened up 2 narcotic farms, one in Lexington, the other one in Texas. And they wanted to hypothetically make a prison to where the prisoners would grow vegetables, serve out their stint, and this would also serve as like a rehabilitation center. So instead of just giving them really, really hard time, they were going to hypothetically expose them to exercise, sustainability, clean living. So what's interesting about this is that this was an MK Ultra site. The Lexington Narco Farm in particular was an MK Ultra site. It's not often talked about. Um, it was primarily, yes, African Americans, but it also was also other people as well. So they didn't just limit this particular experiment to African Americans per se, although a lot of jazz musicians at that time were hooked on heroin and it got sent to the Lexington Narco Farm at the time. So what he's stating is correct. They did double bind experiments on people in these various different prisons for a consecutive of almost 77 days of just double bind LSD testing. And about this is that there are survivors of the narco farm that underwent like these sort of MK Ultra experimentation. One of them being William S. Burroughs. One of them also being William S. Burroughs Jr. His son actually went to the same narco farm eventually. He documented it. William S. Burroughs documented in his book, Junkie. William S. Burroughs Jr. talked about this in Kentucky. In addition to that, there was another guy who was a African American author that wrote books during the 1930s and 40s. His name was Clarence Cooper. Yes, his name was Clarence Cooper. He also was sent to the narco farm. He wrote like street literature about his experiences on the narco farm and getting washed out, and he actually mentions in his book the MK Ultra experimentation. So it's kind of interesting. All these famous people were subjects of MK Ultra, all the way from neo noir writers to William S. Burroughs, countercultural figures, snitches and gangsters like Whitey Bulger. All these people were like, they were all subject to like MK Ultra. So it's kind of interesting. And Uncle Ted, of course, Manson, and so many others that are nameless. Let's continue.
Triple and quadruple doses of LSD every day for 77 days.
Did they all survive?
We have no idea
Okay.
what happened to them. This has stuck with me ever since I wrote that book. What happened to them? Did they ever find out what was given to them? Did they think they were going crazy? I think if the...
Do you think we're still experimenting on prisoners or people in prison today?
I don't have any information about that.
Okay.
I'm hoping there'll be another book about what's
Mr. O'Neill,
happening now.
what are some of the worst abuses in MK Ultra?
There were many. The Frank Olson case, which was referenced earlier, that was a murder. I don't believe that was a suicide. And the motivation was because he was going to be a whistleblower. He worked at the CIA, he worked in the development of biological weapons, and he was planning to go public and announce that the United States government was using biological weapons in the Korean War. And also, he was going to share what he knew about MK Ultra experiments, including lethal experiments. And there's a documented case.
How many, gentlemen, how many people do you think died through the MK Ultra program or were murdered?
No idea.
If those who died largely were outside the United States, many people were experimented to death in that safe house in Germany that I visited, and people in the neighborhood told me they knew what was going on in that house, and that people who were experimented to death are now buried in what used to be forest plots that are now covered over
Do you
with
think the German
apartments.
government knew what the U.S. government was doing? Do you think there was a partnership there or knowledge?
Yes. There is a memo that was written by the German Secret Service to Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, telling him Americans are here capturing citizens, capturing people and conducting extreme experiments which are in violation of German law. And Adenauer decided to put that aside and not to
I
investigate
have one more
further.
question because I have 15 seconds. Is this a massive cover-up by the U.S. government?
It's certainly a cover-up of what happened in the past.
Mr. O'Neill?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Mace. I now recognize Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. To Dr. Kinzer and Mr. O'Neill, I want to focus on the information that we do have and things of that nature. Do we know of, can you name the locations, say the prisons, the hospitals, other institutions, and the cutouts as you described, either one of you folks described them, that would be familiar to us or the American people? Can you name these?
Yeah, if I could begin just by saying, at the end of the 1977 hearings, Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator Daniel Inouye, who were the co-chairs, demanded that there be an investigation to find out who were the perpetrators, where were the experiments conducted, and most importantly, to locate victims, compensate them, notify them, because many didn't even know they'd been experimented on, and give them lifetime medical care. President Jimmy Carter and Attorney General Griffin Bell said the federal government will begin an investigation. That never happened. Instead, the CIA created something called the Victims Task Force to investigate itself. It was a two-man investigation to locate victims, and they only looked for people who had been experimented on in the safe houses. They completely, because I interviewed both of them before they passed away, they completely avoided institutional experimental programs at the hospitals. And you're asking about the hospitals, the Oklahoma City Hospital, the Lackland Air Force Base Hospital, the Lexington Addiction Center, which Dr. Kinzer referred to, the Holmesburg Prison, Vacaville Prison, universities all over the country, Yale, Ivy League universities. None of those records there was a criminal investigation was also supposed to start into Gottlieb's destruction of the records. That had been announced by the Justice Department. And I interviewed Griffin Bell and asked him what happened to all those investigations and what happened to all those efforts to locate victims. He said it just must have fallen through the cracks.
So it was the DOJ that was supposed to investigate?
DOJ, the Department of Justice, and they just kept passing it off and passing it off.
You know if the DOJ in their investigation visited the places that you've named?
No, absolutely not. From
wait, hold on a second. They didn't, or you don't know?
Oh, no. I asked the two men who did the investigation, and they said all we did was look into what happened at the safe houses in San Francisco and New York City in 1962.
So is it possible?
Okay, I just want to. I'm getting a little tired, so I am going to mention something here that he mentioned about the MK Ultra records being destroyed. One of them was Vacaville, which people in the audience should know if you've looked into Vacaville history. That Edmund Kemper was housed there. Donald DeFreeze, who was a informant during the Patty Hearst incident. Also, there is Charles Manson was also housed in Vacaville. Vacaville, I believe, was attached to UC or Santa Cruz division of UCLA or University of California, um, and tied heavily to behavioral modification research. And some of the early true crime people, some of the detectives that would go on to profile like serial killers, were tied into Vacaville. That is John Douglas and Robert Ressler. Also, in addition to that, I would argue, and I'm going to mention another operation that in the future I'm going to cover quite intensely. That would be Operation Phoenix. Operation Phoenix is another operation that was about behavioral modification, getting people to kill at will in Vietnam, which was also connected to these type of psychological operations that was concurrent during MK Ultra, another spinoff, and some of the theories that Dave McGowan talks about don't seem that far fetched. If some of the revelations we're going to see now from the initial hearings, but let's continue.
Possible that information and documentation remains at the prisons, the treatment centers, the universities where these things were conducted? Is that possible?
Yeah, well, I found Dr. West's records at UCLA in his file. Hospital records are really hard to get because of HIPAA laws, and prison records, the Bureau of Prisons do have a lot. So yeah, it is possible there's still documents buried places.
What were the average ages, if you know, of the people that were experimented on? Were these children? Were these middle-aged? Were they...
Well, there were adolescent studies done in juvenile detention facilities and jails with kids who were 16, 17, 18 years old, and at institutional schools for wayward kids. The National Training School for Boys here in Washington, D.C. had them. So it ranged from, I think, adolescent, pre-adolescent, through any age.
If you could describe, either one of you, the number of potential victims, if you could hazard a guess.
There were 149 programs that we know of that were subcontracted out.
Programs.
So yeah, outside. And that's what we know of. Again, everything we know of is minuscule compared to what was really going on. So, I mean, that could have been into the tens of thousands. And I believe that's another reason that nothing was pursued, because if those people were compensated, it could have bankrupted.
Has there been any recent attempt to locate, identify victims of this?
Not that I know of.
I would just add that there's been considerable progress. There was MK Ultra research going on at a psychiatric hospital in Canada, and the Canadian government has made a real effort to try to find out who the victims were, and also to compensate them and to provide them with medical treatment. So if we're looking for an example of a place where it was done better, even though it was on a much smaller scale, Canada would be a place to look.
So other than embarrassment to the federal government, maybe agencies involved, and particular individuals who are probably likely deceased at this point, what is the reason for the mass redaction of the information that we do have? Has any reasoning been given?
Shame?
I'm sorry?
Shame?
That's what I'm saying, other than embarrassment, but I think it stands to reason that probably the individuals involved in conducting and authorizing this activity are probably all deceased.
Sure.
At this point. Is there any reason to believe otherwise?
No. I make those arguments in my FOIA requests, but it doesn't get me anywhere. I don't know about you, Dr. Kinzer.
All right, time's expired. I'll give.
Thank you, Representative Perry. I'm now going to go to a second line of questions. So I'll be recognizing myself, followed by, I believe, Representative Bober and either of the representatives if they'd like to join in. I wanted to elaborate further, Dr. Kinzer, on what you had stated about potentially there being bodies, the locations, Germany, because I'm going to reach out to the German government after this to get the ball rolling on that, if that is indeed the case. Can you just elaborate further on what you were hearing from people in that area, what they were saying, and then also to potential locations of bodies?
First of all, the memo that Chancellor Adenauer received is on the record. You can find that memo warning that these operations are going on. I did speak to people who lived in that area, and they all understood. Some of them had cooperated with an investigation by a German magazine, Der Spiegel, that called that house the CIA torture center, and in that article it said there were deaths, but the number is not known. So it was a secret to us, but what we were doing in that house was really not even a secret to the people in the neighborhood. It reminds me of the bombing of Cambodia. It was a secret to us, but if you were living in Cambodia, you would have known about it. So I think there is fruitful ground for research looking into what happened in Germany and seeing what can be found out about these hugely destructive and devastating projects that were essentially systematic torture going on in this house and who knows how many others.
Just to confirm, too, when you found the initial transcripts with the chancellor or correspondence, was there a response from the U.S. government to the Germans?
No. The U.S. government would possibly have advised Adenauer not to pursue it, but I don't think Adenauer would have even needed to be told that. He would see it, he would understand his close partnership with the United States made it impossible for him to criticize anything the U.S. was doing. Don't forget this was not so long after the end of the Second World War. So no, there was no effort to reveal anything about what happened in Germany. And in fact, one of the FOIA requests that I made that was never fulfilled, and one that I would urge you to pursue, is what was Sidney Gottlieb doing during 2 years in Germany? He went to Germany and went to live there as a case officer. I was never able to find out what did he do during 2 years in Germany. There were huge numbers of MKUltra experiments going on in Germany, including a number that were fatal. That would be a very interesting catch of documents to find.
We will definitely be following up. My next question would be for either Dr. Kinzer or Mr. O'Neill. Declassified CIA records have revealed that officers deployed overseas have used USAID funding as an official cover, or USAID as an official cover for operational work that had nothing to do with the mission of USAID, i.e. humanitarian aid, medical relief, etc. In some cases, CIA officers operated under USAID cover engaged in lethal activity in places during the war in country from 1965 to 1975, and since MKUltra seems to have found its origin in drug experiments conducted on prisoners overseas and first by the SS in Nazi Germany and then by U.S. intelligence in camps captured from the Germans, do you believe that USAID may have been used overseas to further influence or further the MKUltra, for example, on prisoners of war? Since part of USAID's mission was to administer drugs to the poor and needy populations, would the organization have abused its mandate by poisoning foreign populations or creating disassociated states for interrogation or torture?
I can't speak directly to AID, but it's certainly true that during this period, after the Second World War, the United States was using publicly announced and official U.S. government agencies to carry out covert action. We now know, for example, that 5% of all of the money appropriated for the Marshall Plan was diverted for covert activities. A number of U.S. agencies were used as cover by covert operatives, and that AID could have been one of them sounds very likely to me.
And the NIMH admitted to allowing itself to be used for covert funding of MKUltra experiments in the 1970s when the operation was disclosed.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Thank you all for being here. I remembered when all the talk about MKUltra broke, and then they were talking about lawsuits, and there were lawsuits, and the CIA and the federal government said that this didn't exist, and then they came back and said, well, it does exist, and then, but we're not doing it anymore. I guess my question to y'all first is, which lie do we believe? Because, thank you. Obviously, there was an open bar before this thing started, so thank y'all. But Dr. Kinzer? Hit your mic, brother. You're not on the mic. It's an old CIA trick. Just kidding.
I put myself in the place of one of those senior CIA officers, and I'm thinking to myself, like the ones back in the 1950s, well, other people must be doing this. We'd be looking over our shoulders, and that, I think, is your job. So I think there is a definite air of urgency and total secrecy. If any current research is going on, and if it's conducted in any comparable level of secrecy to the original MK Ultra, it's very deeply secret.
But one thing you said, though, it's going to be hard for Congress to act when they're so dadgum compromised. I mean, y'all are in the business of twisting ears and telling us things that we've done, and that sways a lot of people up here. Somebody doesn't want to wreck a marriage or their business or lose this glamorous job that we have. And so I suspect that has a lot of play into it. Sorry to interrupt you. I apologize.
All I mean to say is that I think if there are such projects going on inside the U.S. government, there might be a sense that we can do this without any hostile supervision.
What are the possibilities that what we've learned in MK Ultra, now that it has advanced so much to algorithms and the computer and getting to loners, that some of these loners could, through this just mass propagation of whatever you're doing, could cause someone to maybe take a shot at a president?
I know there's a lot of speculation out there about the Butler shooting, and I guess even the Charlie Kirk shooting. I just hate to speculate because I don't know. I have no firsthand knowledge whether those guys were programmed or through their computer activity. So I would never hazard a guess, except to say what I've already said, that they developed means that we've never been told about many, many years ago, and I imagine they've evolved to be much more effective now. So
let me interrupt you one more time, and I apologize again. But don't you think that they could cast this broad net through these algorithms and other things, and maybe they don't know the exact person it's going to affect, but they know what type of person it's going to affect, and they know it's going to happen, and that way they can't predict when it's going to happen, but they think it will happen, and then that way they can sort of wash their hands of this whole thing and say, well, we didn't have anything to do with it, but in effect they really did, because they put this out there and they continue to put it out there. To what other method you're talking about? Go ahead, guys. I'm sorry. Ma'am, if you want to jump in.
She's with NIH.
Okay. Doctor, go ahead.
It sounds to me like you're describing something like the Martin Luther King assassination. The FBI didn't carry it out, but it created such a climate just denouncing King as the most dangerous man in America and putting out all this material about how he was helping communists that they must have thought, it's going to filter down. Somebody will take action, and then we can say we didn't have anything to do with it.
And James Earl Ray was a third-rate thief. He made an incredible shot, 1 foot on a commode, 1 foot in a bathtub, leaning out of a window, basically, and the next day, or that afternoon, all the shrubbery was cut in front of the flop house he was staying in. There's a lot on that one that will never be discussed. I have some friends that were there, so I guess I'm on pretty close to firsthand knowledge. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to get audited when I walk out of the room. I know it. So thank you. Chair Lady, I yield back my 4 seconds.
Thank you, Rep. Burchett. I would like to now recognize Representative Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I would love to let you gentlemen just talk some here, but when we're bringing up operations like Naomi and MK Ultra, there's Operation Mockingbird that was going on at the same time as MK Ultra, and it really ties into what Congressman Burchett was talking about with radio waves, where we have these like a Venn diagram of individual people and the military casting a broader net. So you have the radio waves, computer activity, the Operation Mockingbird, the programming that is taking place. So what do you see in relation to what was happening then and what we are seeing now that could be types of the same kind of programs and even using direct energy weapons or the like?
I would just like to say one thing. There was an objective outlined in the early proposals for MK Ultra to do experimentation to see whether they could do mass conversion, convert entire populations. I think that had something to do with the France incident that you were talking about earlier. Again, today it's all speculation, but back then, they were logical means to see how you could influence people's thoughts. And Mockingbird played into that, which if people don't know, that was where they had CIA assets or co-opted people in the media who would write basically propaganda and try to control the thoughts and beliefs of the population to what the CIA needed. And would be surprised if it wasn't.
Sure, I think we saw it even during COVID with all of the NIH funding that went to COVID and the Wuhan lab and then everything that came out of that, trying to make people believe in something that wasn't there. Dr. Kinzer, do you have anything on this?
I would say only that in the modern age, maybe radio waves and drugs are not necessary to control people's minds. We have such a great advertising, propaganda, press, social media collaboration that certain opinions are marginalized and real debate is frustrated because people are not given access to full amounts of information. So that's a way of controlling the minds of populations. It doesn't even require sophisticated electronic or psychopharmacological means.
Anything else you'd like to add for our next that we haven't? Maybe you have answers to questions we haven't asked.
I would just like to reiterate something that I said in response to your earlier question,
sir.
and that is that there's a reason why conspiracy theories are so widespread in America. It has to do with the disassociation between what.
Okay, I want to say something since I haven't made a comment in a while on the live stream. So just mentioned there is like, and I'm a bit tired, but I'm gonna try to explain this to you. That's like really interesting that I've researched and looked into after looking into conspiracy culture. Is that conspiracy culture is now being weaponized. Um, and so you might have had like people that were initially into conspiracy culture for its, for just extracting facts from situations and also looking into exploring like, topics that maybe had been hidden in plain view by society. But now you have something I think very much very nefarious that more than just grifters is that now conspiracy culture has a currency online and it has a big following. You now have the tendency for people now to weaponize conspiracy culture and delegitimize legitimate researchers while also submerging like concrete facts about the government to where they have hidden stuff about topics. A good way to look at this is not just the MK Ultra, subject or topic, but another way is to look at sort of ufology. Ufology in itself has, believe it or not, been always a covert operation from the CIA. CIA officials have always implanted themselves into ufology circles. Another would be remote viewing, which was done by Ed Dames, who used to go regularly on Coast to Coast AM. In addition to that, there was also various different instances, such as like Linda Moulton Howe inserting herself. The recent guy that they talked about died recently that used to be on Gaia TV. Dave Wilcox is another good example of conspiracy culture being weaponized. as a political theory and a political tool to destroy narratives and to craft psychological operations within the media. And matter of fact, that's how it kind of works, is it identifies all of the stuff that people are familiar with and identify with, and then it takes and alters it to the point to where it manipulates people into believing like totally false information. It's a very complex maneuver that intelligence agents and people that are like in advertising know very well. So there is like a weaponization of like conspiracy culture, which was pointed out in this meeting. And someone was asking, why did they disclose MK Ultra right at this moment? Well, I would argue because the economy is bad. Iran is like, the crisis in Iran is looming. The Palestinian issue is like high on leftist mind. And this is like causing a lot of cognitive dissonance for like American citizens. So what they're doing is they're calling this like dialectic. In addition to that, we also have people like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and a lot of these other like new elites that are emerging that want to like basically develop these data centers. And so they know, instead of like, getting people extremely mad, is they want to now rehabilitate the credibility of the United States government and these United States institutions so they can like do future psychological operations. Because one thing you need to know, and this will probably get me called a fascist by people, which I am not. This will probably get me called a fascist, but I'm going to say this. Democracy requires, in its existence, various different psychological operations to be running at a time. It is not a stable system. That means you need some type of boogeyman psychological operation always running in the backdrop like a virus, or like some kind of means to solidify national patriotism, and also solidify their existence in the nation state. But that is the truth. If you dissect democracy, you have to keep doing these psychological operations over and over and over and over again, and they have to shift. They have to contain these like seismic shifts in conspiracy culture and in like political movements. So you have to keep these things oscillating at multiple streams of time to keep democracy like in play. So I'm going to say that, at the risk of sounding like a fascist, I'm going to say that.
We say we are and do, and what we really are and do. This has become more and more clear to more and more people. Therefore, they're suspicious of nefarious dealings by the U.S., and they're also suspicious of other things that aren't nefarious at all. But there's just this mentality that is created by the covert sphere, and that is what makes people realize that things that used to seem really far-fetched are not so far-fetched after all.
Yes, well, Congress, we create these agencies, and we even provide their funding. We appropriate that funding, and then they come before us often and are too big to even answer simple questions that we have and be held to account. So it does cause for a lot of deceit, a lot of doubt in the American people, and certainly within us as members of Congress when these agencies refuse to answer to us, the branch of government that actually creates them and provides their funding. And then, of course, the American taxpayer, whose money is being stolen to fund all of their programs and agencies. So I think that would be another reason how these conspiracy theories grow, because government has grown so big it won't answer to the people. Maybe they just think the people are too dumb to understand, but certainly we want to get answers to the people. And I appreciate you gentlemen for being here today. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Representative Boebert. Representative Burleson, do you have any further questions? Okay, I now recognize Representative Burleson for 5 minutes.
Mr. O'Neill, going back to Charles Manson and the Helter Skelter incident, can you explain how in the world someone who is an illiterate musician that seemed to be not exactly the brightest.
Okay, this is stupid. This is like, I'm going to just say this right here. This is a very stupid observation of this guy about Charles Manson, and I don't agree with this guy's assertion. Like in the 60s, like in the 70s, someone like Manson that already had this sort of mystique about him, already had knowledge from these various different like prisoners he interacted with of being like a pimp, and somehow like also embedding himself maybe organically or inorganically within the cultic milieu of, you know, California at the time. It's not hard to see how Manson like had a following of various different like women at the time. Let's go also with Squeaky Fromm. Let's start with her. Squeaky Fromm was the most loyal of the Manson girls, and contrary to popular belief, Squeaky Fromm came from an solidly middle class and even middle upper class background in California. She was a quiet girl, mostly a school marm, I would say, that all of a sudden, you know, was like ensnared by Manson. So it's not beyond the realm, especially Manson had, you know, somewhat of a music ability. He wasn't a very great musician. He was a capable songwriter, and he had like a certain kind of charisma and a way of talking. So he may have been an illiterate hillbilly from Kentucky that was a super maniacal sociopath, but he had a way to like snake charm a lot of the women that way he was around. And Manson also created like some really interesting mythos around his name. Now, I'm not glazing Charles Manson. And, you know, like I said, I'm a little skeptical of the process church stuff, like a lot of my colleagues and friends in the parapolitical community. But I'm willing to entertain if there's evidence that, you know, the process church was heavily involved with Charles Manson and the Four Pie Society, and there was connection there. I'm willing to entertain that. I'm even willing to go so far as to give Maury Terry a second look. Even though I sort of discount the ultimate evil by Maury Terry, I'm sort of skeptical about a lot of his claims. But I'm willing to give both the Process Church connection to Manson and also Maury Terry a consideration. But this is a very stupid take, in my opinion, from the people, and, you know, lots of illiterate people and people that seem, you know, not so bright have a lot of sway influence, and more so than a lot of other people that are educated or esteemed. That's not how Riz works. You know, I mean, as much as people probably begrudgingly will say, you know, Charles Manson had aura, he had Riz, he had a certain type of mystique about him. So I don't agree with that shit. I don't agree with it. Now, as far as like, you know, what it's not, I'm not going to discuss the whole process church thing, but it is kind of interesting. Tim O'Neill is never entertains the process stuff, even if it is like highly speculative. He never entertains it. You know, even if I disagree with the process church stuff, I'm still going to mention it. You know, I'm still going to talk about it. But anyway, let's continue.
Person somehow became a cult leader and was able to, you know, inspire all of these individuals to do crazy things.
Unfortunately, I spent 20 years trying to find out how that happened, and what I was able to prove was that from the moment Manson was released from federal prison in 1967, he violated his parole, went to the Bay Area without permission, and was immediately put under the supervision of a federal parole officer who basically gave him leniency as he gathered his group of followers, gave them drugs, dominated them, turned them into more or less subservient robots who would do anything he said, All that happened under the watchful eye of a parole officer named Roger Smith, who was also doing drug research at the same clinic that Jolly West had set up his operation to recruit subjects. All the way until 1969, when Manson finally ordered the murders that he was later convicted of, arrested repeatedly for escalating crimes, beginning with petty thievery, stealing cars, and then rape, attempted murder, drug possession. Each time, not only wasn't he prosecuted, his parole wasn't violated. So the federal government, in some capacity, enabled him to do what he did and flourish until these crimes happened. And in my book, I make a case, and it's a theoretical case, that it was part of an operation called Chaos, also with the CIA, that we haven't talked about today because it really doesn't have anything to do with drug research, but it was created to neutralize what the government believed was a revolution that was happening in America in the 60s, beginning with the anti-war movement and then the black militancy movement and the Panther stew of a cauldron of possibilities that Manson emerged from all that when I don't think he should have.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you have an individual, Jolly West, who was working with this parole officer. You think the parole officer was making the connection so that the drugs were then flowing through?
Well, the parole officer was at the same time he was supervising Manson's parole, running a research project called the Amphetamine Research Project out of that clinic, and that was studying amphetamines and violence and drugs and group behavior and gangs in the Bay Area. Again, I hate to speculate. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but when you see the tentacles that cross paths with Manson when he got to Los Angeles as well, I believe that he was he was manipulated and at the very least given freedom to do what he did while he was being observed.
And then the same individual, Jolly West, ends up in Oklahoma, correct? So that's where he operating out of Oklahoma during even this time with Mr.
When he
Manson?
contracted with the CIA, he was at Lackland Air Force Base. He was the chief psychiatrist at the hospital, so he began his experiments there. A year after the letter that I quoted in my statement where he was describing what he wanted to do, a year later on July 3rd, 1954, a 3-year-old girl was abducted and found later in a gravel pit, murdered, and next to a car that had been abandoned. And the search party that found the little girl's body was approached by a man who was an airman at the base, and he asked them where he was and how he had gotten there. He was arrested for the murder and described by the military officers who had him in custody as being in a trance or dazed. He didn't have any drugs in his system. Mm-hmm. He didn't recognize his wife when she was brought to see him. And at his trial, where Jolly West was his advising psychiatrist who examined him,
of course,
it emerged that he had actually been being treated at the hospital at Lackland in an experimental program to cure his chronic, debilitating migraine headaches, and he was executed 4 years later.
And then years later, he ends up volunteering to handle the Jack Ruby.
West does, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So just before we wrap up, is it in your expert opinion that Jack Ruby and Manson were assets of the intelligence agency specifically pertaining to MKUltra? Were they MKUltra victims?
Yeah, theoretically, Manson, I've never been able to prove absolutely. Jack Ruby, I believe, this is something else. The Warren Commission investigation, on the Warren Commission was Alan Dulles, the former CIA director, who authorized and ran MKUltra until he was fired by President Kennedy. The liaison to the committee for the CIA, who handled the information coming from the CIA back and forth to the Warren Commission, was Richard Helms, who was a direct supervisor of Jolly West. They knew who West was. They knew that what West was capable of and what they had paid him to do and what he had reported to them that he could do, including inducing mental disorders in people. That was never disclosed to the commission as far as anyone knows. So I believe that West was put in there to keep Jack Ruby from telling his story.
Wow. In closing, I just want to thank you all for being here today, and we will be following up, Dr. Kinzer, on your request to fully redact. I'll be following up personally with the director of the CIA, the MKUltra files that we do have. Also, as I noted earlier, there will be more that will be declassified, specifically pertaining to newly found records that were located in what we were discussing earlier. I did also want to just state that, for the record, in regards to what statements were made earlier regarding the German government, we will also be following up on that. If there are indeed people that were victims of this that have been buried, we would like to know who those people are and who their families are as well, in order to correct the historical wrongdoings of this government. Without further ado, I would like to state that all members have 5 legislative days within to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses that will be then forwarded to them. If there are no further business without objection, the task force stands adjourned.
All right. So that comes to an end. The it comes to the end, the MK Ultra hearing. Too bad I was not there. I would have liked to have went to DC to like actually attend that meeting. Maybe someday I will get a chance to interact with some of those people, like Tim O'Neill, even Stephen Kinzer. I'm certainly going to like talk more about their books and the MK Ultra phenomenon and some of the psychological manipulation that's involved with MK Ultra and some of the implications on my personal research, which is on the internet and the weird cults and subcultures that are on the internet that I have explored through various different podcast appearances and also through posts on my Twitter. And so, and probably like in the future is also going to be, some kind of presentation or maybe book format I'm going to work into because I actually like I don't want to like toot my own horn or like really be arrogant on this because I'm probably not the first person to formulate this theory or idea, but I personally think there was some weird sort of psychological manipulation that's going on with internet subcultures. Uh at least going back, I think, to the DARPA project. One thing also I want to mention that was not mentioned with this particular MK Ultra chaos is that during the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, around the same time when like DARPA sort of like was being used as a military project and psychological project, there was also like gangs and other that were being studied in the Oakland, California area. And they were implementing this data and doing it in predictive behavioral models. Um, This is also something Buckminster Fuller, the guy who's the architect and one of the early people that modeled artificial intelligence, came up with the Epcot, the geospheric dome, and also with was also implementing like artificial intelligence to predict strikes in factories. This is like something that was going on at the same time. So there's a lot of like really interesting, weird stuff that coincides with a lot of psychological and behavioral modification research at the same time. And it dovetails, of course, with occultic and illusion as well. But I hope you guys have enjoyed my commentary on MK Ultra. I will try to provide content on this channel on a more regular basis once I get my own personal life aligned with a ideal time schedule. But I will ask in the future if you guys want to continue and support my research. I am eventually going to start a Patreon. Not at me. I know you're groaning. You're saying, "Oh no, he's shilling for himself." Yes, I am shilling for myself, but I'm never going to make it too expensive for you guys. And this is voluntary. I'm still going to provide you with excellent content for free on this channel. but I just am going to do the more extensive deep dives on my Patreon. Sorry, guys, but I have to get some money for my research as well. Because it's only fair, because I try to go the extra mile for you guys. Nevertheless, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Demento Mori. This has been your host, Doc Inferno. If you want, check out my Years of Lead podcast that I did with No Way Jose. Check out my various different appearances all over the internet, wherever you can find Doc Inferno. It's an infamous, controversial name, but I'm always known for my quality research and for my insights. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. This has been an MK Ultra sponsored by Alan Dulles and James Jesus Angleton. Until next time, this has been Demento Mori.